YouTube, but I can see it on Zoom, of course. So.
Okay, live now. There are extra buttons involved.
Five waiting.
Oh, and YouTube, but I can see it, of course.
Thank you, Elton.
So what? I don't know where we're at now in the actual. Damn, that really fucks it up.
Now you're live.
Well, now we're live, everybody.
Yeah.
I think that what's going to happen from the live side is they will see me talking and then people saying it's not live because of the latency issue. But now we're live. So all you missed me saying was I'm David McCarricker. I'm the host here at Theory Underground. Today it's going to be Nance, Ann, and myself coming at you live from Portland. Mikey is joining us remotely from Kansas City to talk about the CCRU, Cybernetic Research Unit, sort of Nicklandian concept, Hypostition, to set Nance up to talk about Hypostition. It's a very important idea if you care about social change, if you care about changing the world, and if you are concerned with the fact that most people who try to change the world nowadays undermine what they're trying to achieve. And so that'll be that. But then I also said, probably before we were live, that we have a very special guest joining us for the panel discussion at the end, and that is Doug Lain from Sublation Media. He's the only one clapping. The joke was funnier the first time. And we do have a Zoom audience. We do have a YouTube live audience. We do have an in-person audience. That is because this entire tour has been taking place in a hybrid fashion. And so this is kind of the sort of bootstrap setup that we currently have. The people in the room are able to see it. YouTube, you just have to imagine. But basically, they can see the laptop with the people on the Zoom side. And then I can see the people on the Zoom side projected over their heads. And so it's like, I've got the people here, I've got the people over their head. And then we were doing this thing with the live chat where that's also projected up above and people could see it on the screen. But YouTube live commenters suck. And so, and I'm not saying that there were a bunch of trolls or people like blowing up the spot, but the tendency is for people to kind of just say whatever comes to mind instead of like, yeah. Right. And said it's a little distracting instead of like, oh, good point. It's usually just distracting. So Zoom has won out over YouTube live comment sections. For now.
We have a solution coming up.
We have a solution coming up. We do aim to have our own chat eventually on the screen, but that's another time, another place. So for right now, this tour that started on September 2nd will be ending on October 9th. Tomorrow is our last live streamed event. They will be in Seattle. And then we have two more events that are more intimate. They're going to have a lot of family and friends. They're word of mouth only. They're not being advertised. They're not being streamed live. Parts of them will be released after the fact. But this is the second to last actual live streamed one. So for people who've been with us on this journey, thank you so much for all of your support. It's meant the world. I was going to give a quick rundown of what's happened, and then I will set Ann up to give the first presentation. So basically, we started it in Boise, Idaho. We did an event. It was about the launch of these books, right? Underground Theory. But also we focused on psychoanalysis and Nick Land and all these various kinds of questions related to that stuff that we wanted to ask Zizek, because Slavoj Zizek joined us live. It took a lot to get him to actually join us live. It was easier to get him to submit 2-hour volume than it was for us to actually get him live. But he came and he did it. And I think it might have been the best interview in the whole world. That's how I felt. I felt like it was really good. We got a lot of compliments for it. And it's because we kept Zizek from going into Redux land. And instead, he was engaging with us genuinely. We got a lot of new stuff out of him. We thought it was really cool. But the two presentations that most people saw, if they watched the whole stream, were from Brian Weeks and Elton LK of the Working Class Intelligentsia, as well as the DSA podcast Class, right? So Elton is also here in the live stream right now under the name, or sorry, in the Zoom call under the name Holly Hudson. That's his wife. But Brian Weeks and Elton were talking about the things that came out of the courses that Theory Underground has done, right? So Theory Underground is a course site. It's my own teaching platform, and I collaborate with other educators there. And so the idea of the university was the first course that we did at Theory Underground, because why are we doing stuff outside of the university in the first place? And of course, there are a lot of lines of critique that you can take against the university, but we like this idea of reading Karl Jaspers and his idea of the university, which is something that he wrote after the defeat of the Nazis at the end of World War II, during the period of Reconstruction and the denazification of the university system, right? And so he wrote that text basically saying, like, yeah, we can critique it, but also just like, what's the idea itself? What's it for, right? And it's for an idea, it's for a community of truth seekers coming at things from different perspectives, trying to reach the universal truth. Of course, that will always be failure. It will always be a failure. It'll be a path ridden with failures, but the idea of the university is what keeps us going. And the other presentation from Elton was on the idea, it's a related idea, the professional managerial class. And he was saying that the Vampire Castle, Mark Fisher's Vampire Castle, is really just a professional managerial class. And that this idea should not be understood as an epitaph or epithet, or as a slur, but should it be understood as an actual a category of material political economy. And so those are basically the threads we've been working through on this whole tour, as well as critical media theory. And so the psychoanalysis thread really took place in Kansas City. I think that's where really the rubber hit the road, because Mikey gave us a crash course on blue collar jouissance, or enjoyment, right? Like the form of enjoyment specific to the working class, as opposed to, in my presentation, PMC enjoyment, right? And how these two things clash. I used Oliver Anthony's famous song, Rich Men North of Richmond, as a go-to example of the left's failure to respond to genuine populist grievances, right? Instead of honoring and dignifying the spirit and then giving a better sort of direction for those kinds of sentiments, the tendency is to just, oh, what does he know? What a reactionary, what a loser. And so these threads of psychoanalysis, the idea of university, the professional managerial class, and critical media theory have been something we've been working through with Andrew McLuhan at the McLuhan Institute, with Chris Catrone in Chicago, with Daniel Tutt in Washington, D.C., with Norman Finkelstein in New York City. And so we get to kind of bring those together today. And then tomorrow in Seattle will be the sort of final live stream event, and that will be on theory versus practice. And really, we're going to come out hard in defense of theory and argue that there is no such thing as useful practice outside of theory. And more importantly, that phases of one's life should be seen as, you should be able to see your life and see a phase of interest towards theory as a genuine undertaking, not an escape from practical things, but actually something to give you a basis for returning to practical things. Because Theory Underground is ultimately for burnouts, politically disaffected people, and working class autodidacts and academic renegades. And so that's pretty much what I wanted to do as a tour recap. The books are doing really good. Time Energy, Why You Have No Time or Energy, my book, was top of the existentialism category for a long time. I haven't checked in a while, but as far as new releases goes, it was ranking the top. And then same with Underground Theory, it was the top in critique and structuralism or a couple other categories, social philosophy, something like that. Anyway, both are doing pretty good. We didn't expect to sell more than 50. I think we're way over that number at this point. And so give it up to all the authors published in Underground Theory. Seriously, guys. It's so good to meet so many of you. And for people who are interested in publishing with us in the future, we're not taking submissions for books. We're not taking submissions for just, oh, you wrote something, you're interested in publishing it. You should go to Sublation for that. actually. Doug just said we're not taking it either. Well, I don't know who is, but we're not. Underground theory is really for people that we know who've done the courses at Theory Underground. It's not for big name people. When people see the big names, can you hand me one of these copies? I want to kind of point something out. When Twitter lost its mind when they saw an early release draft of this cover, a lot of people were critiquing the idea that we had these big name authors in bigger letters on the front cover. And I'm sorry, it's just called marketing. It's also it's kind of modeled on a tour or a music festival poster. And the idea of that is always that the bigger names are bigger, but it might lead people astray and make them think that that's the point of the book. And that is not the point of the book. The big names are really just a vehicle to getting the smaller names some potential recognition so that people who are in the working class who want to think and get engaged through our teaching platform or other ones can see, oh, the pathway to actually having my voice heard if I actually take these courses seriously, it has an actual future horizon. There is a future there, right? That's the real idea. And so what we're about to hear from is Anne Snellgrove McCarricker's reflections on academia and activism, right? We put scare quotes around these words because we at Theory Underground aren't exactly sure what those things should entail. And based on what they currently entail, we think in a lot of cases, they're not doing what they purport to do. And I'm introducing you, by the way. I'll go get them. You come here. Yeah. She's trying to get Carl in here. So we're going to switch the cameras out. And while we do that, Anne, we're basically ready for you. So what I'll say about Anne is that she is a co-instructor at Theory Underground for the Idea of University course, as well as the Critical Media Theory Research cohort. Critical Media Theory is basically Marx meets McLuhan and has a baby that looks something like Baudrillard, but is different. So basically, really like the inroad is cell phone addiction and the attention economy making us all distracted. And then us stepping back and saying, we want relative freedom from these things. And what does that mean? What does that look like? And so that's what she's been co-instructing here. But before that, at Boise State University, where she was also a student and will be a student again, she also taught a course called Is College Worth It? And so she's within a very short amount of time, she was a student, a researcher, and an instructor. And so that gives her, I think, a very unique insight into all of the things that are going on today. And so with that, I would like to now welcome to the stage Anne Snellgrove. Put your hands together, everybody. Thank you.
Cool audience. Online and in person. Welcome. Thank you all for being here. So for people who saw the poster for this event, the theme of our event today is psychoanalysis and hypostition. And that is where Dave and Mikey and Nance come in, and that's where their expertise lies. The title of my talk is actually activism in academia. And so what I plan on doing today is kind of setting the scene that we see specifically in academia and in the university that Dave and Mikey and Nance will be able to kind of pull from and explain it with psychoanalysis a little bit. Yeah, my expertise lays in kind of understanding the neoliberalization of the university. And that's why the talk of my title is Activism in Academia, more specifically the quotes, activism in academia, because the activism isn't what I would call real, important activism. And the academia is not the same as it was in the 60s, in the 70s. Before that, I think with the rise of neoliberalization in the university, we've seen a decline in the quality of the education. We've seen things kind of change. It's not quite academic anymore. The education has been instrumentalized to be more career-oriented. And it's de-emphasized the liberal arts. And so what we're seeing, with that kind of de-emphasis of liberal arts and a more corporate emphasis and a more career and emphasis in the classroom and on the college campus more in general is that there's not the same kind of like mass student movements that once used to happen on college campuses, specifically like anti-war protests in the 70s at schools that were teaching and promoting liberal arts. We don't see that anymore. Now it's either, conservatives saying, oh, the university is indoctrinating us with socialism, or it's liberals like canceling and trying to get conservative professors fired. Like each side sees problems with the university. And it's divided. Classes don't really teach these kind of broad-based skills anymore. In my experience, and what the sociological literature shows is that classes are now teaching kind of limited learning skills. So students just leave the university with a degree to get them a career, and not this kind of broad, like liberal arts education in which they take classes in all the subjects that are actually quality classes. It's a lot more bureaucratized. It's a lot more McDonaldized in the sense that classes are easily repeatable, calculable. Things are like pumped out really fast, and the goal is just to get in, get out, cheap, get the most money out of students. And it's all, in the end of the day, like job prep. And so that's kind of why I put academia in quotes. And then the activism comes in, because at the same time that we see the university not really creating these, educated, democratically engaged students, we still see universities tending to be the hubs of activism today. I think a lot of the activism that we see comes out of universities and from university college-aged students. And that is where I actually want to share just a few examples that then David, Mikey, and Nance will be able to pull from and talk about in just where I think activism fails in the university. And the first example comes from a book that I have referenced a lot throughout this tour. I talk about it in my piece in the Underground Theory Anthology. It is called The Coddling of the American Mind by Jonathan Haidt and George Lukianoff. They give kind of an overview of three, what they call the untruths that they see in the university today. One being the untruth of fragility. So what doesn't kill you makes you weaker. The untruth of emotional reasoning, always trust your emotions. And then the untruth of us versus them. Life is a battle between good people and evil people. And so they describe how they've seen this come about in the university, why they think it's come about. They kind of give some social prescriptions. It's liberal and not the most kind of rigorous in like a class kind of analysis way, but I still think it's a really valuable book. And the best part of the book is all of the examples that they give of this like activism and these three untruths playing out in the university. And so one example that we like to reference, because it is like crazy that this actually happened, was from Bergen Community College in New Jersey. And so I'm just going to read straight from the book. An art professor was placed on leave without pay and sent to psychological counseling for a social media post. The post showed a photograph of his young daughter wearing a t-shirt that depicted a dragon and the words, "I will take what is mine with fire and blood," which the school claimed was threatening. The professor explained that the shirt referenced the popular TV series Game of Thrones, but an administrator insisted that fire could refer to an AK-47. Like real things like that are happening in the university. I saw it and experienced it with my own two eyes at, a public university in the Pacific Northwest. Students experience this every single day. This hub that is supposed to be about engaging students and, getting kind of a democratically engaged populace. Carl Jaspers sees the idea of the university as a community of truth seekers at these very institutions. Instead, I think we see misguided activism, under the guise of being anti-racist and pro Black Lives Matter movements. But I think it manifests in ways that, like this, you go, really? They canceled someone over a Game of Thrones t-shirt? And so one thing that I saw, not only in the Boise area, but especially in the university, is like Venmo activists. And so their kind of whole mode of activism is Venmo me my personal reparations saying that to like working class students who are all, hundreds of thousands of dollars in debt. Like, with what money? With what money am I supposed to Venmo you with? And they're saying, like, I'm the leader, I'm the voice of X marginalized group, therefore pay me. And then these same activists would, come into campus, come into the student government, and try to do things like, again, under the guise of anti-racism, that when you tell the story in retrospect, it's like, oh, that's what they were fighting against. And so the example that I think is just really interesting is at this university, there was a Starbucks on campus, and they decided to get rid of the Starbucks and bring on a locally owned coffee shop. It was owned by a woman. She tried to employ, a lot of like women on campus. It was great. I was like, oh, cool, let's get rid of the corporations and support a local business. Well, the downtown location of this same coffee shop had a little Blue Lives Matter sticker on the window. Okay, like we can critique that and say, oh, well, that's also misguided. But long story short, they had a sticker because her husband is a police officer and was injured in the line of work, and so she supports the police. This was all during a time when, ACAB, all cops are bad, sentiment was going around, and students within the student government at the university found out about this sticker on their other business. This was not at their on-campus business, and began using their platforms within the student government. They were using their student government emails, sending email chains going, we need to get this, racist business off campus. The president at the time sent an email back to his peers just saying, hey, we need to be careful. We're not like under the literal, bylaws of this student government. We are not allowed to use our positions for this. Students can do whatever they want outside of the jurisdiction of the student government, but they were like trying to make it officially sponsored by the student government. And the student president just said, hey, we got to be careful. He was canceled. He was called anti-Black. He ended up being removed from his position after a whole proceeding of how he was, so anti-Black and so racist and such a white supremacist, even though he was like, I'm an Asian American student, like, please stop, assigning these identity prescriptors to me. It was a shit show, like, to say the least. And it really made students lose faith in the legitimacy of a student government, an organization that actually could do a lot of, good and for, social justice or for activism on the community campus, truly advocate for students, advocate for minority students, students of color, etc. And instead they used it to like kick a business off of campus, which was not under their jurisdiction. There were other, legally binding contracts with food organizations and whatnot, all at stakes here. And so that's what they put their energy towards. And then on the other side, you've got these kind of more liberal leftist activists on campus. At the same time, I think, especially at the time of Bernie Sanders gaining a lot of popularity, we saw a rise in like DSA participation, and an organization started on campus called the Red Republicans, which is now called Red Labor. It is a faction of the DSA, I believe, last I was aware. And it was a similar, great intentions that ended up being slightly misguided, and I think missed out on an opportunity to really hone in on this like working class sentiment that at least the 2016 Bernie Sanders movement had raised. And so these, I was kind of one of the founders of this organization. I thought we were going to be doing something different, reading theory, trying to do something different than other kind of working class leftist Trotskyist organizations. And I ended up having to leave the organization because at the end of the day, it just kind of turned into, like, to put it politely, just some history dude bros, like, pretending that it was 1917 Russia. And so again, this university that was once kind of to educate students in all fields of knowledge and really promote like a well-rounded liberal arts education, is now this very broken, instrumentalized, neoliberalized university where I think students still have this feeling that they want to do something good. They want to make change for the world. They want to make the world a better place. and the classes aren't actually teaching them how to do that. They're not teaching them how to be engaged citizens, really how to critically think, not teaching much like actual history or theory. It's like I was assigned a teen novel in a 400 level sociology class about like race wars in America. It was a great novel, but why am I reading it in a sociology class at the 400 level? You know, so students come in, I think, really feeling the fire and feeling the despair of this current capitalist moment. And it's not happening, that improvement and real dialogue isn't happening in the classroom. And so it manifests in these various types of activism on campus that are so extreme and so silly. And we go, why is this happening? Like what kind of change is canceling this coffee shop or LARPing like it's 1917 or, you know, firing professors for wearing Game of Thrones shirts? What is that going to do? We'll talk a little bit more in our Seattle event about the importance of theory, but that is just kind of my summary of a little insider perspective into what is going on today in American universities, where unfortunately I think activism from well-intentioned students and professors falls short. And like I said, the guys here are going to give us a psychoanalytic perspective onto why this might be happening and really use that concept because I think it applies so well in this case scenario. So thank you for listening. Next up, we're going to hear from Dave. Dave is going to go up, give us a little introduction to psychoanalysis. For those who don't already know who Dave is the founder, CEO, president, chief of Theory Underground. Yeah. He's going to give us an introduction to psychoanalysis. So give it up for Dave.
So when Theory Underground began for real, December 6th, 2022, that was the launch. I unlisted all Theory Plead videos from my channel. I unlisted all of them so that when you would go there was nothing showing. And I let people know that I would be re-releasing stuff over time, but the real point was to show people this is the beginning of something new. Myself as an influencer in the influencer sphere was something I was calling into question or that I'd kind of gotten over. And then I was trying to figure out a new way to use these media means at our disposal. Because I thought when I started my channel, it would be a great way to continue learning and developing myself by teaching. But instead, what I found was that I was trying to play this game for the algorithms, and it was undermining my education and my development. And so I kicked it. But really, part of that was because of my burnout in 2020, right? Seeing the collapse of the 2020 Bernie Sanders campaign, seeing the fact that on the one side, the people to the left of me, the people who thought themselves more left than me, maybe they were, who knows? I don't care. That's that lefter than thou thing that I talk about in Underground Theory. My piece in here is called Lefter Than Thou, and I'm kind of going after that form of enjoyment itself. It's a form of enjoyment that I think is can be seen across the left and into the post-left and the anti-left. There's just like this, oh, are you really left? Well, this is what left would really be. And so like there's a form of enjoyment in that. And I wanted to get out of it. And I wanted to create a more intentional education space. And so I nuked all my videos. I mean, I have been re-rolling some of them out. I think I've probably re-released like 15 so far. But the first thing I actually did was I took all my conversations with Michael Downs, who will be the next speaker, and I chopped those up. I cut out all of the, I don't know, distractions, a lot of our side conversations, which is some of the best stuff, to be fair. And I just tried to make these into sound bites that are maximally useful to people who are trying to learn Lacan or Zizek, because when I first started burning out on the, oh, I stand in front of a green screen and I represent some kind of idea about what the left is supposed to be. When I burned out on that, I was like, well, what am I supposed to do? I want to keep developing myself. I still like my audience. I still like my channel. I still want to use it. And so what I was like, well, Mikey can teach me and then I can model being a student, because I don't see that happening very often on YouTube. Really, like you don't see a lot of people who use their role to model the student position. And so Mikey was teaching me introduction to Lacan, and then he was teaching me introduction to Zizekian theory of ideology. I only say it that way because of him, but it's ideology. And so ideology critique from Zizek is the idea that it's not just the explicit or the implicit level of the message that you should be looking at, but you should also be looking at its obscene underside, which is to say how drive gets off on something, right? Well, I took these sound-bited clips for the Lacan 101 and the Zizek 101, and I added like a sort of commercial at the end of each one that was anywhere between 5 and 14 minutes. I mean, it was definitely not standard practices. It's not what you're supposed to do with your channel. But what I was doing was I was telling people we're coming to a city near you. This is going to have a material element. If you're watching this, chances are we're coming to you. Fill out this form so you can be a guide, a host, or what's the other one? A volunteer. And so there's a bunch of different people who filled out the form. And we went to everybody's city who filled out the form, except for people who filled out the form after we were already on the East Coast and then we left. So we got a bunch of submissions from Florida, like multiple. And we would have done Florida, except Anne hates it. I'm just kidding. I'm kidding. No, we would have done Florida, except that people who filled out the form too late. And so the tour was already planned and we were already kind of out of the area. But there's a few other places around the United States where people are saying that they would like to host us or guide us or be volunteers next time we do a tour, which is awesome. Next year, we're not doing a tour. Or if we do, maybe we'll do like a short little stint. I know we're doing the European side of this tour, but in the United States, we're not doing another tour until 2025. And that's so we can give ourselves a break. And it's also so that we can do a conference in Boise, Idaho. And so the conference in Boise, Idaho will be a continuation of this underground theory volume of people who are in dialogue with one another within these pages, as well as people who read this and then have thoughts about stuff in here, and then they actually want to join the discussion. Well, one of the people who filled out the form, maybe like the first person, is right back here. I don't know, should I say your name on, is it all right if I say? It's Anton. Everyone give it up for Anton. Anton secured for us this space, which is an amazing space. Outside of the fact it's a little hot in this room and the internet's a little funky, this space is the ideal space. This is exactly what we want. When we were in New York City, we had to spend a lot of money on that space. When we were in Washington, D.C., we had to spend a lot of money on the pizza bill at Comet Ping Pong, which is where it was hosted. Familiar with Comet Ping Pong, everybody? Yeah, it was, well, it's a long story why we ended up there, but the pizza is really expensive. I suspect that's because they're used to Hillary Clinton buying it on a regular basis. So like they just kind of crank up the price. Pizzagate place, yeah. Well, anyway, this space is more like the vibe of what we were looking for. This is a lot closer to the kind of space that we started off in Boise, Idaho at Xanadu, which is a building cooperatively run by the Burners Alliance there. Burners Alliance, that's like the Burning Man people. I don't know. I don't really know many of them. I know their space, and it's a good space to do events from. And there's not a lot of these civic spaces that are very useful anymore. Like the library that we're going to be at tomorrow in Seattle almost canceled on us because of some very technical bullshit reasons that actually required us changing a bunch of things about the event to meet their red tape. And so, Anton, first of all, thank you for this epic spot. I plan on doing something with the GoPro later where we actually show it off and make a unique video about that so that people who are thinking about future events can incorporate that knowledge of what we need into what they're doing. Because ideally, we have more than just like a 2 or 3 or 4 hour window, right? Ideally, we can show up early and actually do some of the virtual events
Dave, I don't know if you can hear me, but we lost sound.
I think he might have accidentally muted himself. That's what's showing on my screen.
Yeah. Good call.
But we still probably.
Yeah, if you guys can see that Dave is muted.
Yeah, I don't think I can unmute him.
And why?
Hey, Nance, can you hear us?
Now, can you hear? Talk, Dave.
Hello, hello, testing, testing.
Yeah, we hear you now.
Yeah, now everyone can hear me.
Yep.
When did I cut out, Mikey?
I don't know, like 5 minutes ago.
No, we can't hear you, Mikey.
You can't hear me?
Speaker.
So was it back?
Sorry, everybody. Yeah, I'm back. So where was I?
Mike. I can hear
me?
Mikey.
Everyone in the room knows where I was.
I can hear Mikey.
This is fucked, guys.
And I can hear Dave. Can you guys hear me?
So, all right. Well, I'll talk for a minute because I realize people are at least watching from the. Why is my phone making noises? I turned you off. All right, it's all falling apart.
On.
Nance, what is going on? Can
You
you?
guys were catching the video on some device? Yeah.
So Nance, both of these microphones for Nance's computer. And so when Nance had a problem with his computer just now and had to restart it, I was talking, but it wasn't working. And the thing is this is the first time we ran microphones through his computer instead of this computer, because with this computer, all along tour, we've been having a crazy echo issue whenever we actually had someone joining remotely through Zoom, because they speak over this speaker and then there's the speaker and the microphones pick that up. But we found a way to have everything that is going out to the live stream audience side coming through Zoom, which cancels that echo effect. And it was a very easy solution. But the problem with it was that he just had a problem with his laptop. And
But now we're gonna do it twice. Anywhere else, from like off the internet, are you recording your voice? With some device.
No,
Oh, that's-
no, I know.
Yeah.
So can I just boot one of yours? Should I boot the TU Portland one or should I
Portland, okay.
boot it? Yeah, everyone, go to the bathroom really quick. We're gonna figure this out. It says,
Okay, now
okay, I'm removing.
we're gonna go in. I'm still in there twice.
Oh. So there's there's two Nances. I see the one with you. Do you want me to just remove the one where I don't see you?
No, because the one where you don't see me has the audio.
Okay, well, I'll remove the one with you then. Nance has been removed.
But now. Hold on, we might. Say something.
Hello, I'm talking. Talking.
Mikey or Philip or Holly, Elton, someone say something.
You hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you.
All right, good.
We are back in business.
All right, go let everybody know we're back. Mikey, where were we? When you lost me? Because I kept talking the
Well,
whole
I mean,
time.
you were talking about you weren't even you hadn't gotten circled back around to psychoanalysis yet. You were still talking about God, what was it?
Anton?
Yeah, it was right when you were talking about Anton. Yep.
Okay, great. I wish that YouTube Studio still allowed me to remove chunks inside of the video and that not create a copy of the video, because I would just remove that. But can you let everybody know we're back and we're going? Okay, you did. All right. Well, in that case, I'm going to take it from here. So the short version of everything I said when I was actually muted is that Anton in the forum for the tour had asked for me to psychoanalyze them. And so first of all, I can't do that. I'm not a psychoanalyst. Moreover, I'm a student of this in theory. And that means that I have no experience of it in practice. And so it's not only convenient that Anton asked that question for this tour on the basis that it gives me a chance to actually talk about psychoanalysis and these concepts, but also it's very serendipitous that Catherine Liu had just done a presentation in Claremont at Pomona College when we were there in the LA area. And hers was on in defense of the clinic, analysis in the clinic. And originally she was going to do a talk on in defense, or no, not in defense. She was going to do a piece like, don't talk like theory academics. And I'm against talking like theory academics for a lot of reasons. I'm against the mode in theory academia. I've been to a lot of conferences. I don't like it. It's not great. And there's a lot of reasons for that, because basically people talk in their code, in their little jargon circles, and they're getting in some kind of jouissance maybe from basically this in-group, out-group dynamic where they're talking insider speak, right? But at the same time that I have a problem with that, I also have a problem with lowering the bar to such a point that we lose key theoretical distinctions. And I think that there are key theoretical distinctions in Lacanian psychoanalysis that make it relevant to philosophy. And so even if they become outdated in the clinic, there's still a reason that they have some efficacy in the world of philosophy and theory. And so what I want to do today is to put forward my defense of psychoanalysis for theory. And so I respect and love Catherine Liu, and I appreciate her work. And I think that she gave a really good talk. But it is in the spirit of what she had done there that now I want to do my response. And towards the end there, when someone was telling her to be careful with this or that she was saying, she said, people have been telling me to be careful my whole life, and I'm over it. It didn't get me anywhere. And so I want to be careful because I want to make sure that people understand that I respect her. But at the same time, what does being careful actually get us? We actually have to understand the contradictions at work to get to the bottom of things. And so more than trying to convince you all of something, I want to set up a contradiction so that you can all learn from that. Everything's good now? Okay, awesome. So drive versus desire is going to be my focal point here. And drive versus desire has to be understood in order to make sense of this term that all these theory academics keep using, jouissance, right? And so Catherine Liu defends just translating it into pleasure and or enjoyment, right? And I told her, actually, Todd McGowan refuses to leave it untranslated. He translates it into enjoyment. But when you translate it into both pleasure and enjoyment, the key theoretical distinction that is lost, that is useful for philosophy, I don't know about in the clinic, I can't tell you about the clinic, but the key theoretical distinction that is useful for philosophy and also political philosophy, critical theory, ideology critique, etc., is between jouissance as intensity, extreme, sort of stressful enjoyment, and on the other side, pleasure. Pleasure, like you're having a good time at the beach, you're running and laughing with your friends, you're having a bubble bath, and you're reading some good poetry or something like that. Like this difference between pleasure and enjoyment as this sense of like extreme excess that's giving you trouble is something that I think is key, and it's a distinction that we should not let go of. And the reason that it's useful in theories of social change and philosophy more broadly, well, I'll get into that in a minute. So jouissance, I think we can leave it untranslated in the same way that we leave ressentiment untranslated. This is a Nietzschean concept for turning your vices into virtues without actually doing anything in a way that is self-congratulatory and gives you an upper hand over your enemies, right? We all go for these seductive, self-congratulatory narratives. Ressentiment is supposed to get at that idea, and I like it. I think it's useful. And as a worker who learned about this idea while working, I was going to college and working at the same time, so there's an argument there. But no, I was working still, and I was thinking, this really helps me make sense of my own mistakes. This really helps me make sense of how I feel misperceived or misrecognized by others. And this really helps me, I would say it gives me words for making sense of things. And I take that to be a form of liberation, right? When you cannot describe an experience that you're going through or cannot get some critical distance on yourself or others, then that's a form of subjugation. It's structural stultification. It's functional illiteracy. These are things that are systematically used to keep us dumbed down and predictable as a human population. And I hate that. And so if we want to just do it the way Todd does it and leave it as enjoyment, that's great. But pleasure and enjoyment have to be used to set this distinction. Another way forward that could allow us to use pleasure and enjoyment interchangeably would be to find a good adjective. We could find a good adjective that characterizes one form versus the other form. So you could say calm enjoyment versus intense enjoyment, right? But why is this a useful distinction in the first place? It's because we're split subjects, split between what we consciously fantasize for or desire or think we want to be or how we want to be seen on the one side, and what we actually do on the other side. And in a lot of cases, we don't recognize ourselves in some of the things that we do, to the point where you could write a memoir and leave out some of the most important details about yourself because you don't relate to that part of yourself. And that part of yourself is the part that is wrapped up in drive. That part of you is this part that is unconsciously acting out things in a manner characterized by repetition compulsion, the compulsion to repeat certain things. And for some people, this can take the form of obvious addiction. Whereas for other people, it can be less obvious. There's millions of examples. I like to go to road rage. You don't recognize that you're getting enjoyment from this because you're stressed out, you're angry. Why are these people driving so slow? Or why are these people driving so fast, right? But you have this idea of how it should be. That's the side of desire. That's the side of fantasy. It's this idea, it's the idea of the ideal, the idea of perfection. And then that's running counter to what you actually do in a repetitive way that undermines the way a society should be. This is, I think, setting up for Nance's talk on hypostition, the basic idea that we do things that undermine ourselves. Specifically in terms of activism, we have a vision for the kind of society that we want to create, and now we're doing the opposite. We're actually, we have a rationalization for it. In the same way that you have a rationalization for the reason that you do what you do in road rage or binge shopping or binge eating. You might have some rationalization for why you go about it, but this is that kind of rationalization that is downstream from the fact that you're doing it, and now you're just making up excuses for yourself. If the unexamined life is not worth living, then not having concepts for making sense of these things and not getting that critical distance from ourselves it makes life not worth living, right? So I take drive versus desire to be like probably the most important part. When you hear these terms like OJA or fantasy or ego ideal or ideal ego, a lot of this stuff is playing on the side of perfectionism, ideals, what we want to be, how we conceive of ourselves as part of all of that, what we're trying to be, versus the drive side, which is that part of us we don't feel familiar with. We do not recognize ourselves in that. And it's like this other in us that keeps undermining our shit, right? So I find that a very useful distinction. Now, the question of whether we should all go to analysis or not, or whether this stuff is really useful in the clinic, is one that I'm open to, and I hope to see debated. I hope to see like conversations between people like Catherine Liu and Todd McGowan, to see conversations between Slavoj Žižek. And I know there's just a lot of these people in the world of Lacanian psychoanalysis who don't care about or even have a problem with its usage in philosophy. But my problem is this sort of gatekeeping, stay in your lane thing that's saying, oh, you find these concepts useful? Well, stop that. Just go lay on a couch. Well, I'm trying to understand the world. And I don't think Žižek is just relevant because he's entertaining. He's a cartoon character. He's a meme. We find him fun the way he talks. I think that it is that he has been beating the same drum basically his whole life. And that drum is that there is this obscene underside to everything that we do. And that we actually get a perverse kind of enjoyment from these things. And once you actually realize that, and once you start seeing that you're actually getting that, say, from your road rage or from your binge shopping or from your gambling or from your whatever, and you actually realize, oh, I'm actually getting this kind of enjoyment from literally the thing that I think I hate the most. I'm actually in some way getting off on it. I think that gives some kind of critical distance, some kind of relief. And that is necessary for living the examined life. So that's basically it. The three examples that I want to share as far as like actually applying this to things. In Kansas City, we talked about PMC enjoyment versus blue collar enjoyment. And we're using the word enjoyment in terms of jouissance, that perverse kind of intensity that has you repeating things in a way that actually undermines what you're trying to be all about, right? And the PMC form is one of spotting errors, of calling out, trying to make people accountable, trying to control the behaviors of others, it's a sort of nitpicking, Mark Fisher said, priestly desire, as opposed to the blue collar form of enjoyment, which is saying and or doing things that rub the professionals and managers of capital wrong. I say professionals and managers of capital because I like to sidestep the question of class altogether when it comes to this. I do believe that it's a material, political, economic category. We can talk about it as we were doing with Ben Burgess at Pomona College. And that's a whole other conversation, but just at the basic level, the credentialed, college graduated, professionals and managers of capital, the people who control labor and or monopolize the kinds of skills that give you some kind of dignity, as opposed to the kind of work that is the opposite of that, right? Degrading. That antagonism between blue and white collar work doesn't just go away. And in fact, when people become anti-populist, I think that it actually drives that antagonism more. So I'm not a populist, but I am anti-populism, right? And then some people would say, well, the anti and the anti, two negatives makes a positive. So that just makes you a positive. This isn't math. That's not how it works in language, right? To be anti-populist means I primarily just have an issue with the fact that anti-populism on the left today is so insulting to genuine and grievances coming from working class people, right? And those antagonisms don't go away when we try to just brush them under the carpet, right? So I think it's useful for thinking about class antagonism and the forms of enjoyment unique to different class strata. I also think that it's good for thinking about lefter than thou enjoyment, as I touched on earlier. I don't know if that made it onto YouTube, and so what I'll say is, yeah, Underground Theory, I have a piece in here called Lefter Than Thou Enjoyment, and I'm saying that the through line between left, post-left, and anti-left is the form of enjoyment itself is basically saying, well, you're not really left. And I think that that doesn't mean that means that question is irrelevant or that game is irrelevant, but maybe it's not the most important thing. And I am living that out by saying, I don't care what you call me. I literally don't. It doesn't matter. What I care about is everybody being able to have their time, energy, so that they can find their talents, develop their skills, and do so with others cooperatively, have friendships, have families, and not just live lives that are centered around jobs. Like, that's what I care about. Whatever you want to call it, I don't care. And then I'll close off on the other form of enjoyment that I was playing with Ben Burgess after the Pomona College thing back at the bar. All right. And that is analytic philosophy versus continental philosophy. We were basically just sitting there theorizing that together. And so the form of enjoyment unique to the analytic philosopher is the pedant, right? The nitpicker, the person who wants to hold you down to a sentence you said, and then keep digging deeper and deeper into that sentence. And you're like, yeah, but the point of what I'm trying to say is over here. And they're like, yeah, but let's be precise, right? And as Burgess said, we care about that so much that in the analytic spaces that we end up having a lot of conversations about nothing whatsoever, except for the form of what we're saying itself, right? So I remember, being in an analytic department when I was studying philosophy, lots of conversations about whether Sherlock Holmes is real or not. It's like, cool, guys, but what? And then they use these, well, in some possible world, this thing can be imagined. Therefore, it's not necessarily true that thing's not real. And it's like, what? It just doesn't make sense. It doesn't, to me, I care about this life. I care about our time and energy in this world. And any politics has to be based on actual goods, right? And so analytic philosophy rubs me wrong because in those spaces, the form of enjoyment is just being specific itself. But what's the form of enjoyment unique to continental theory and philosophy? The jouissance of the continental philosopher is mastering impenetrable texts, slippery concepts, difficult prose, and being able to interpret it in some unique or fresh or seemingly original way. And so these are traps, right? But they can also be advantages, because if you have a proclivity towards one, or if you're disposed naturally towards another, good, lean into it. But just remember, it should be more than just jacking yourself off. And I think most of the time, what people are picking up on when they see a problem with one or the other side of this split within philosophy is they see a bunch of dude bros jacking off. Maybe it's one another, and you can say it's a circle jerk, or maybe it's just themselves. Who knows? We should be able to enjoy what we're doing. We should be able to have fun. And if our form of enjoyment is specificity, or if it's being all over the place and being able to crack difficult prose, great, put that to use. But don't go the extra step and actually get high on your own farts and think that this is a good in itself. It's not a good in itself. It might feel good for yourself, but the question is what are you doing with it? And I think that, at least when it comes to Lacan, people like Slavoj Žižek and Todd McGowan have helped us see that in politics and in social change, drive is operative. And it's not to say, oh, you're not free to make decisions. It is to say, learn to step back and see the way that you might just be getting off with yourself. Thank you. So now I'm going to set it up so that Mikey can talk. So all you need to know about Michael Downs is that he is a warehouse worker in Raytown, Missouri. He got to study philosophy for like 15 years, 17 years before he had to do wage labor. He worked part-time, but he was able to do that until he had to start supporting his mom. And so now he has to work full-time right at the point that he was actually ready to start writing his first major book. And so that's the reason that I have for the last several years been saying hashtag free Mikey. I think that you all should become patrons at his Patreon, because if he could get enough, then he'd be able to teach the courses he wants to teach and write the books that he has in him. And he has many in him. And every day that he is doing wage labor instead of what he loves is bad. It's bad. It's bad for all of us. But ultimately, I hope it's bad for capital, because it pisses us off at capitalism so much that we're going to take that motherfucker down. Outside of that, he has taught a course at Theory Underground, which was an entire course on Zizek's second most important book, For They Know Not What They Do. I mean second chronologically, not in terms of like his overall or whatever. But For They Know Not What They Do is one of his most difficult, unsexy books from a certain standpoint. And that's why we thought we should put it front and center and actually do it seriously, because we don't give a fuck about the algorithm. At a certain, well, we care a little bit. You should like, comment, subscribe, blah, blah, blah. But no, at a certain level, though, we wanted to say, look, we'll read Carl Jaspers. And even when we do Zizek, we're not going to just do whatever's the thing everybody wants us to do. We're going to do what we think is important. And so Mikey taught a whole 18-week course on that. And now at the end of October, he's going to be teaching a course on Nick Land. It's an introductory course to Nick Land. I'll let him say a few words about why he thinks it's going to be cool or why it matters himself. But the concept he will be talking about is hypostition. And it's related to everything else we're talking about here. So it just made sense for him to do it here. So please put your hands together to welcome Michael Downs.
Hey, thanks for being here, everybody. This is fun. So why am I teaching a course on Nick Land? If some of you don't know, he's a very controversial figure, to say the least. I'm teaching it, however, because I think it's really important for any of us on the left to understand what's going on with this guy, because I think his lore, his image, his appeal is only going to grow and grow and grow. I don't think he's even come close to reaching how influential he's going to be, especially on the right. And it wasn't always apparent that he was a rightist thinker. This was obfuscated, especially in his most important famous works from the 90s. But he's a very strange type of rightist, very strange type of libertarian. And so he wrote a piece, what was it, 2007, 2008, somewhere around there, called The Dark Enlightenment. And it's this founding text of the neo-reactionary movement. And yeah, I think it's really important for those of us on the left to understand what's going on here, because I think it's just going to continue to have a big influence on the right in future generations. And so that's part of, and I mean, look, it's undeniable. Land's work is a lot of fun. He's not a rightist or traditionalist or anything like that in any typical sense of the word. And so he is a very singular thinker. I totally give him his credit when it comes to the originality of his thought, but a lot of left now just wants to sweep him under the rug, and I think that does a disservice to ourselves. So that's part of why I want to teach the course. So this concept I'm going to talk about tonight is called hyperstition, and so I guess a little bit of background would help here. So Nick Land becomes a teacher at Warwick University in the early 90s. I'm not sure exactly what year yet. But Sadie Plant's another really cool thinker who was there at the time. And Nick and Sadie end up doing some really experimental philosophy conferences. And they start to garner a kind of, I mean, I don't know if they'd like it, but for philosophers, they developed a kind of cult following, and their students got really interested in what they were doing. And so Mark Fisher was one of their students, Reza Negarestani, Ian Hamilton Grant. There's a lot of important thinkers who've had a lot of influence, who were inspired by Sadie and Nick. And so what they end up doing is they form a philosophy or theory collective called the Cybernetic Research Unit, or CCRU. And what it was is they're experimenting with this Deleuze-Guattarian ontology, which, a flat ontology, which is to say it's a collective or multiplicity of many elements, but no one has the hierarchical position. So they would come together and they do a lot of drugs and listen to a lot of loud jungle music. And they would sit around and collectively write theory fictions together. And if anybody who's studied the history of philosophy, regardless of whether or not you agree with them, it's hard to deny the originality and the raw creativity at work in these theory fictions. And so that was something that I was attracted to with them, where I see this unique way of philosophizing. I mean, look, we know there's famous, the Frankfurt School, and the Situationists, but there was something very hive-mindish about what they were able to pull off. And to this day, I mean, they'll tell you that if you ask them, well, who wrote this thing on Echidna Stillwell, or who wrote this, and they can't tell you. It's a complete flat production, basically. And so one of the key concepts that comes out of their work together is hyperstition. And what hyperstition essentially, I mean, it's very easy to just say, oh, well, they're talking about belief, right? But the problem is, if you say belief, it presupposes a kind of subjective belief, like, oh, they're talking about a person's personal beliefs, and that's not it at all. So they define hyperstitions as fictions that make themselves real, which sounds like a bizarre thing. Like, what are we talking about? Fictions that make themselves real. But given Land's Deleuze-Guattarian ontology or metaphysics and his background in cybernetics, he's able to pull off an ontology and a theory of time that lends credibility to this idea that theories can actualize themselves. Now, he's relying on Deleuze's concepts of the virtual and the actual. So a very simple example of the virtual and the actual. Okay, so imagine you're standing in front of a window and you're holding a rock. Now, if you throw that rock hard enough at the window, it's going to hit, and a crack pattern is going to emerge in the window. You're going to actualize a crack pattern. Now, there's a sense in which that crack pattern was already there. It was virtually there, but it wasn't actually there. And for Deleuze, the way that something virtual becomes actual is through intensity. In this case, it would be the pressure of the rock hitting the window and pulling that virtual potential out into actuality. So when the CCRU is going to talk about fictions that make themselves real, it's as if there's a virtual potential in the future that actually has more weight or more pull to it than the actual present moment does. And Lain's able to think this because he has this concept of negative feedback loops and positive feedback loops in mind. And that's what's going to be the basis of this idea of hyperstition. But let's talk about hyperstition a little bit. So and I just on a side note, I want to give some credit here because there was 2 YouTube videos when I was getting into this stuff that really helped me understand it. One is called Nick Land, Chaos Magic, and Hyperstition by YouTubers Darlene and Schizotopia. And there's another one by a YouTuber named Not Actually, who did a video on hyperstition, and these were really helpful videos. Okay, so again, so hyperstition is a combination of theory and fiction in a way. This is this method that the CCRU is going to take. They get it from Baudrillard, and they're going to take it and run with it. Because for them, in our current moment of cybernetic culture, theory and fiction kind of go hand in hand, where you're having, if you're doing real theory, you're having to theorize fictions that are making themselves real all the time, right? We're seeing ideas that we saw in old sci-fi movies get realized, whether it's in telecommunications or, you know, we see automated cars, self-driving cars. We're seeing all these things, these images that sci-fi films and sci-fi books gave us years ago coming to actuality. And I mean, the CCRU would say, yeah, and it's precisely because they were depicted as fictions that help bring them into reality, that there's a loop of intertwined causality here between the fiction and the reality of it. So, I mean, and one way to think about hyperstition, it's fine, we all know this phrase, fake it till you make it. Right, that's part of what's going on with these hyperstitions, is that if you fake them, if you spread them as ideas, as concepts, and if they start to take hold, if they gain material traction in the world, you find that they actually come to actualize themselves eventually. And there's different examples we can look to for this. But here's a famous definition that the CCRU provides. This is from their writings, 1997 to 2003. This is in Communique 2. So they say, according to the tenets of hyperstition, there's no difference in principle between a universe, a religion, and a hoax. All involve an engineering of manifestation or practical fiction that is ultimately unworthy of belief. Nothing is true because everything is under production. Because the future is a fiction, it has more intense reality than either the present or the past. CCRU uses and is used by hyperstition to colonize the future, traffic with the virtual, and continually reinvent itself. So, I mean, there's a lot packed in there, and try the writing style of Land as a solo writer and the CCRU, it's really unique. There's really nobody who wrote in this style of theory fiction quite like they did. But part of it is when he says all involve an engineering of manifestation or practical fiction that is ultimately unworthy of belief. So one of these recurring ideas that they're going to do is that we can say something like the future hides in our unbelief, right? There's certain realities we think it's impossible for them to become real. And it's through our unbelief in them that behind the scenes, they're working to materialize themselves. And so, I mean, one of the great examples is the idea of artificial intelligence or the singularity, which whether or not that happens, we'll see what the future holds. But we see that, you know, this idea, oh, it's impossible. We can't make robots do what we do. I mean, look, I got a copy here of Hubert Dreyfus's What Computers Can't Do. And it's like we constantly underestimate what technology can actualize. And for the CCRU, it's this constant doubt or disbelief towards this that enables all of it to materialize itself behind the scenes. And so, where do I want to go next? So yeah, so let's say hypostition, element of effective culture that makes itself real through fictional quantities functioning as time-traveling potentials. Hypostition operates as a coincidence intensifier, effecting a call to the old ones. So right there, I want to emphasize this idea that hypostitions are time travelers, right? But this is this strange thing. Land goes out of his way in different places to say, look, when I'm talking about time travel, I'm obviously not talking about sending a physical body back in time, right? We're not doing the Back to the Future scenario. But what he sees is that there's a different type of temporality than our standard concept of linear succession, right? He sees these cybernetic processes, these feedback loops, as involving a blurring of the past, present, and future. And that, in a way, he's going to, in his own way, resuscitate a concept of teleology. He's going to call it teleoplexy. But when he talks about the future being more real than the present, he sees that these feedback loops are geared towards a certain end, right? And that once these loops gain material traction, then the future that they're set to actualize actually is determining the past, right? So you can say, I mean, if you go to basic teleology, that the virtual full-grown tree, in a way, is determining the seed, the nut, right? And that's what he has in mind here, and that it's through the various processes that, if we're talking about acorn, becoming a tree, there's these various processes in the virtual, potentially there, that are going to pull this potential out into reality. And so, but we see this at work in culture. So, and it's helpful. There's a quote in the Bible from the book of Proverbs that says, where there's a lack of vision, the people perish, right? And it's interesting that one of Lain's great examples of hypostition is the nation of Israel itself. Now, for thousands of years, the nation of Israel was disbanded, and then 1948, I believe, we see the restoration of Israel. But if it wasn't for the belief that the Jews had all those thousands of years in the restoration, in the promise that God made them, then would the actual restoration have occurred? No. So at least according to Lain. And so we see with the nation of Israel this great example of the working of hypostition in the world. And again, we can think of many more examples. I mean, one way to talk about hypostitions is to talk about them as self-fulfilling prophecies, right? And I mean, like, so for Lain, he thinks that eventually the techno singularity is going to emerge, which is going to be a super intelligence, and that it's going to be so radically different, so radically other than us and human culture. It's inevitably going to lead to our annihilation, to our extinction. But he sees this already there in ancient doomsday myths. And so in a sense, the us becoming going extinct at the hands of the singularity of super intelligence is really the fulfillment of these ancient doomsday myths that cultures, many cultures developed in ancient times. And so, I mean, but even on a personal level, right, you can see, and you probably know somebody like this, that if somebody is dead set on believing that they're a loser or they're a bad person, even if it's not the case, that belief can turn itself into reality, right? The very fact they believe it helps to actualize the very belief. Now there's all kinds of different examples of hyperstition we see in culture. And they're not all exactly like a fiction that's on a feedback loop that brings itself into reality, but you can think about these different ways where fictions influence reality. So there's the great example from Rick and Morty, where there's an episode that's totally devoted to McDonald's Szechuan sauce, right? And this episode really caught on with people, and it got the Rick and Morty fans so worked up that McDonald's actually brought the sauce back in response to the fans getting all worked up over it. And so you see this impact or influence of fiction on reality in that case. Now, another one of the philosophers I really appreciate is Isabel Millar, and she wrote a book called The Psychoanalysis of Artificial Intelligence. And in it, she talks about the sex bot, that, you know, we see more and more, you know, these expensive sex dolls you can buy. Well, Isabel's thinking about this idea. We've seen it in movies for years, the sex bot, right? The robot sex worker or sex machine. And that's where you have this phantasmatic image, and through technological development, we see that this is going to bring itself into reality. I don't think there's any doubt that this is a pure hyperstition that's eventually going to actualize itself. And then, I mean, and then on level of, you know, politics or geopolitical scale, 9/11 is a hyperstition. Hollywood for years had done these blockbuster, you know, catastrophe films where you see the Twin Towers getting destroyed in one way or another. And it's almost like that Hollywood depiction of the destruction amplified this. Like it's when it happened, you sit there and you're going, God, like I've seen this in movies, or, you know, things like it in movies. And it's a weird that when he talks about hyperstition being a coincidence intensifier, that's part of it, where you're sitting there going, how did this actually happen? Right? This is too improbable to have actually occurred. And yet that the hyperstitional feedback loop is precisely what brings that into reality. It's something we're all familiar with is gossip. How if you start gossiping that a couple is having marital problems and you think they're going to get a divorce, this very gossip itself can eventually put pressure on the marriage and break it apart, and then it causes the marriage to end in divorce. And so, and then I keep unloading examples, but two more, and then we'll start moving on. Trump's presidency was basically memed into existence. We can see the memeing of Trump. I mean, before he was actually elected, for most Americans, the idea of Trump getting elected was just impossible. It's pure make-believe, right? But the memeing of it, the fact that it caught on as a positive feedback loop, a loop of amplification, actually broke through the threshold and actualized it. And then, of course, the other example is finance capital, speculative capital is itself a hyperstition. Speculations on the market can actually bring those very speculations into reality. Investors believe X is the future, so they do Y, which helps to make X into the actual future. And so those are all various examples of hyperstition. And it's worth saying, so just to kind of anticipate Nance a bit, hypostitions. Sorry, Nance, if I'm like doing the spoiler alert, but Nance came up with this idea of hypostition, which fictions that do not allow themselves to be made real. I'm not sure, Nance, I'm waiting to see how you, what kind of strict definition you would give it. But if hyperstitions are fictions that make themselves real, hypostitions would be fictions that ensure that they remain unreal, right? Basically, it's like a hyperstitional process, but one geared to self-sabotage, self-undermining, right? And so there's a couple little examples I was thinking about. So aren't there hyperstitions that actually go against the desire or intention of the person or the group who produced them? The hyperstitions of postmodern neo-Marxists or cultural Marxists actually help to produce this type of person, which again is going against what they would hope to accomplish. And then the American Red Scare, you could say paranoidally asserted that there were communists hiding all over in American society, but this actually served to make more Americans tempted towards communism. At least maybe not the majority of Americans, but I think when you put this kind of radical taboo on something, this is the basic logic of psychoanalysis. Prohibition is eroticization, right? So if one of your things is like you're amplifying this fiction so as to prevent it, you can unconsciously be leading to it being realized, which again, that's a spin on hypostition. It's a different modification of it, but and then you can think about other examples like the woke left speaks of reactionaries. They speak reactionaries into reality in a sense because of the way their discourse functions. They would tell you that they don't want normies to get pushed to the right, and yet they're caught in a loop that keeps pushing normies to the right. And so these are just little examples, but let's see what Nance has. I haven't thought as much about it as Nance has, but okay. So just trying to connect this. So I see Zizek actually giving us tools to help refine this concept of hyperstition. So Zizek has this really great concept of belief, but the problem is for him, he calls it belief, which is the most mundane of words, right? If Zizek had actually coined a new term for his concept of belief, then I think it actually would have gained more traction, because when you use a common word like belief, everybody just, even philosophy heads, they'll just breeze by it like they know exactly what you're talking about. That's one of the reasons you can defend terminology or jargon, is because it's the Heideggerian idea of unreadiness to hand. It makes you stop and go, I don't know what's going on here. Let me actually pay attention. Whereas Zizek just using the word belief, you think you know exactly what belief is, and so you don't really get the nuances of what he's doing with it. But Zizek's theory of belief goes like this, that a belief can function in social space even if nobody has a first-person belief in it. Right now, this is odd because when we think about belief, we think about people having strong convictions or having fidelity to an idea, and it's this real first-person type of thing. But for Zizek, because the Lacanian idea, desire is always desire of the other, you almost can spin it around and say belief is always the belief of the other. And what I mean here is that if you believe that other people believe something, you'll act as if it's true, even if you don't have a first-person belief in it, right? Well, I think this, and Zizek talks about this as the materiality of belief or the objectivity of belief. And what he's getting at is that the big other itself believes, which is to say, in Heideggerian terms, we're talking about Das Man, or the generic they self. Whenever we say, well, you know what they say, well, we're not talking about a specific group, a little cluster of specific people. We're talking about this general generic entity, right? The one. You're supposed to do what one does. Well, the one who does what one does is this generic social self, right? And if you're convinced that the big other, or Das Man, believes something, then you go along with it. You act on it because you believe that that's just how it goes in society, even if you don't have a first-person belief in it. And so part of me sees this as really helping understand hyperstition, because hyperstitions can have this objective status, this material status, where nobody actually has to have a first-person belief in it, so long as we believe that others believe in it or it's gaining traction. And this is part of what memeing involves. And so Zizek has these really nice, these really good examples of what he has in mind about the objective state of affairs believing for us. So these examples here come from Sublime Objective Ideology. And so he'll talk about the inner passivity of the Tibetan prayer wheel. So the idea is you write a prayer down on a piece of paper, you put it on this prayer wheel, you spin the wheel, and then you don't have to worry about the prayer. The prayer wheel is basically thought to be praying for you in its activity. And so the idea is like, okay, I'm not having anything to do with the belief. The belief is out there objectively in the prayer wheel being believed for me, right? And so canned laughter does something similar to this, where if you're watching a show, Big Bang Theory, whatever, and you've got the laugh track going, even if you don't laugh, it's as if the show laughs for you. It's objectively laughing. You don't have to have a subjective laugh, but if it's objectively laughing, you, in a weird sense, identify with it. And so it does the job for you. The chorus in ancient tragedy, it feels for us, right? It objectively feels the pathos of the situation. And so even if you don't feel anything, as long as you've identified with the chorus on some level, then this objectivity is at work for you. And you ever have the sense that in some way if your DVR has recorded a show, you have some weird vague sense like you've already watched it because the DVR watched it for you, right? And so it's like, oh, well, I've got it on DVR. I don't need to watch it. It's a weird little thing that some of us do with that. And then, I mean, a more contemporary example even is YouTube reaction videos. You don't have to do the reacting yourself. The reactor reacts for you. And in all of these instances, he's trying to show how some objective state of affairs is doing something for us. So our subjective state doesn't have to take it into account, but yet the whole thing still works for us, even though we're not the ones doing it. And this gets at what he talked about. Like, they know very well what they're doing, but nevertheless, they're still doing it. Right. And what this, he's flipping Marx around, Marxist theory, formulation of ideology. But what he's getting at is that when we believe at the unconscious level, the unconscious is the discourse of the other. It's not some subjective first person thing. And so it's interesting that Zizek will spend so much time. I mean, another example he likes is the Santa Claus one with the kids. So as kids get older, okay, the kids don't really believe in Santa. The parents obviously don't believe in Santa, but the whole ritual continues to function because the kids go along with it for the parents go along with it for the kids. So, but the point is, okay, what we're getting at is this kind of effectivity of third person belief. And I think that concept alone really helps refine the CCRU's concept of hypostition. I could say a lot more, but I think just connecting those dots have done enough. So Nance, why don't you take it over?
I came up here to introduce Nance, and I'm going to just read his bio from the back of the book, which says, let me remove the pin here so you can all see that. Okay. Hi, I'm Nance. This is my bio. I'm just a random dude with no special education or experience who likes to listen to himself speak. I spend my time complaining about things because it distracts me from thinking about dying. Congratulations. The book you're holding in your hand right now is super dope. Now stop wasting your time and read. He sells himself a little short here. He does have some very special education because he's taken every course Theory Underground has offered this year. And so the two of us have gotten to know each other really well through the courses. And he's been one of the most engaged students. And so in terms of people who support this project, he's probably put forth the most time, energy to the actual subject matters themselves. And the reason I do this is because I can't learn by myself. I cannot learn in isolation. And so we've done like a ton of these 8 to 12 hour live streams that are not listed or that are not public, but we share with people on the forums where we read through texts and discuss them. And he's been in all the courses, and he's been on the tour, and he's been giving talks every step of the way. And we're all watching him evolve like this Pokemon, like. And so if you're all used to seeing a grease ball with really long hair, you'll be shocked to know that that's actually still this guy, same guy, new haircut. So please put your hands together to welcome Nance.
All right. Hello, people in real life, and hello, internet, and hello, future people watching on the internet. Thank you all so much for giving us your time and your attention. I am going to give just a short talk because I, for the most part, really do enjoy the panels. I get the most out of the panel discussions, and I imagine people watching get the most out of it as well. It's we can go deeper, and we can answer some questions, and we can draw some things out. And also, I'm not comfortable speaking, so there's that. I wrote yesterday around the fire just a little bit about hypostition. Hypostition, it's an idea. I mean, it's not a new idea, but the word is a new word. It came out of discussions Dave and I were having, Ann and I were having, Mikey and I were having. Over the last few weeks, we were like, oh, okay, that's it. And I think it is important when it comes to the question of political efficacy, political action. Hypostition is a big concept that some people just refuse to engage with. I believe it's undeniable. But hypostition, really, the way we have been working with it relates more to political efficacy, and organizing and action and theorizing and what we're all trying to do. It would be nice to spend all our time diving into our own and each other's belly buttons, but we really are trying to do something more than that. So yesterday around the campfire, I wrote this, and then, we'll talk. Teleology. All things have a telos, a process of being as becoming. And if you're so inclined, you can extrapolate the history of the cosmos as well as the future from a singular acorn. Dialectics describes this process in a particular language. One might easily mistake dialectics for a prescriptive theological scientism, but in reality, dialectics can only ever describe the past. There are those who believe dialectics can see the future, such as Selden psychohistory, Cleometrics, and many Soviets. This is not CCRU's hypostition, just in case anybody gets confused. Hypostition operates as a belief that belief itself can materialize, manifest, or actualize in the world. Hypostition is then the complete breakdown of this process. There are people who act as if they are already living in a post-capitalist utopia. They perform behaviors and actions that seem out of place, anachronistic, or even delusional in relation to the world around them. And it seems to be the case that they are defeating whatever it is they hope to bring about with these actions themselves. Look, I want to live in a world free from bigotry in all its forms, free from war and genocide and hate itself, or as close as we can get. But that doesn't mean I should act like we're already there. This whole fake it till you make it thing, that exists when we've all been turned into entrepreneurs of self, auto-exploiting objects who amount to nothing more than listings on the infinite catalog on offer under our current undeniable techno-feudalist conditions has got to go. We need to leave room for failure, for doubt and disagreement, for adaptation, evolution. We must leave gaps into which things can move in the ongoing dialectical process of being becoming. We are flattening, even erasing things here at the end of history by rejecting reality and substituting our own desired utopia. I am, for the most part, careful and deliberate with my chosen language. I think about the words I use, what's best to be most accurate and concise. But I also spend a fair bit of time thinking about how my words will impact others. I truly don't want to offend or upset anyone. I don't, however, give a shit or have any patience for public scolding or shaming on the basis of reactionary or exclusive or bigoted language. People in real life simply don't have the time to walk on eggshells when they've got work to do and mouths to feed and bills to pay and an infinity of shit to be done. People who are ostensibly committed to a kinder world are tripping over their own dicks when they go around language policing everyone who doesn't already agree with them. I want to live in a world where we're free to love or fuck whoever we want, with all the caveats. But the fact that I have to include these demonstrates that we are not in that world and that there are a lot of pressing issues we must solve before it becomes our primary focus. But going around and acting as if we're already there is only going to take us further away from that potential future. On the one hand, it is going to confuse, bother, and even offend people who don't already agree with me and share the same vision. And on the other, it is going to keep me hooked into the ideological matrix, slowly suffocating from huffing my own farts. This world in which silence is violence and everyone is the star of their very own irreality series is forcing us all to reject reality, material conditions, and substitute untenable fantasies as our own ideological gaslighting to keep up with the pace and reach of auto-exploitation. Hypostition is belief in this Zizekian way, plus a resolve, or at least hypostition in the way we want to use it with political action. We want to posit something and then we want to act to bring it about. So that is this belief plus resolve in the face of the conditions we're facing. Hypostition is that very same belief plus a destitution, a hopelessness, a reified in-group, out-group absolutism, and internalized neo-serf identitarianism, a negative feedback loop born of an inability to imagine the end or the other side of capitalism and a desperate clinging to identity categories and ideology as a form of coping with our bare new world. So again, I wrote that. It's a new word that we're trying to use to describe how we feel about action and organizing and what should we do with our time? What can we do with our time? We don't know what's best, and I don't think anyone else really knows what's best, but we do need to kind of come together and be graceful with one another, be deliberate with one another, and keep all the bullshit at home. Like this isn't just a costume party. There really are people who are committed and who give a shit. And if you can't, leave all the extra shit at home, then maybe this isn't the place for you. So again, I'm done. I'm not comfortable speaking. I would prefer to have the panel come up here and speak. So thank you all.
I'll say a couple of things while we move stuff around. Yeah, we're gonna want to put this. Come on up, Doug. Okay. Where should I sit?
Wherever you like.
Yeah, I'm moving the camera. He's gonna move the camera. So once you come over here, Doug, pull this chair back, on down. We can all look at you. And we'll have
the center.
Yeah, how are you?
All right, yeah, there we go.
All right.
I like that.
And then we're gonna put the projector is gonna make it so Mikey is hovering up above us. We'll be able to see him from this side. I think the camera can pick us all up. So one quick point of order while Nance gets this all set up is that if you're here in person or if you are on your way here and you're thinking, I missed it, don't worry. We're going to go to a place afterwards. We'll let you know. It's word of mouth, but there's a place. And if you are a drinker of alcoholic substances, then you will be able to do that there. If you like pizza, you'll be able to do that there.
You'll like pizza there.
Yeah, you'll be able to like pizza there. Yeah, you don't actually have to have any. I like it. I don't know if I'll have any. I'll just sit there and like it. So this is the microphone for the people on that side, Doug. And if you want to kind of start, I'll say a couple things. One is that Doug Lain is, I think, very important on the online left, specifically the materialist left. And his various projects over the last decade have inspired a lot of people. And so it's an honor that he is here with us on this panel. His current project is called Sublation. media. I suspect you all know that, but I figure there's probably a good handful of you who don't know that. And so make sure to subscribe to Sublation Media, check out the e-zine, check out the publications, the books that come out of there. And then I want to let you kind of do your own introduction and
Okay.
share our thoughts.
So we're also on YouTube. Sublation Media is
That's
not
right.
just me, I'm part of it. I'm the CEO, I guess. And then there's Alfie Bound, Ashley Frawley. Let's see, Clint is part of it. We just published Chris Catrone. He's a major author with us. And there are others, so I'm sure I'm forgetting at the moment. They're all going to be mad at me. But yeah, I'm a novelist as well as a YouTuber and essayist, and I was really interested in the hypostition discussion because I've written several novels, and two of them seem to come true this year. One of them is called Bash Revolution, which is about actually it's now the past. It was a near future when I wrote it, where Donald Trump was president, which was already happening when I wrote it. And an AI announces that the world is on the cusp of a nuclear Armageddon, that conflict in the Ukraine is getting out of control. And its solution is to take over humanity, to eliminate politics, and to force everyone to just adopt a new persona based on old video games or media, whatever they want. And this year, we're involved in a proxy war in Ukraine. Apple released some sort of goggles that could to do augmented reality. It's very, very close to what I imagined in my novel. And it does seem to me that we're being algorithmically manipulated so that politics are being suppressed. So yeah, like hyperstitial or whatever that was called, hyperstition.
That's why Bad Lefty suggested in the chat that all of those things must be your fault.
Yeah, right. But yeah, so right. So I thought it up and it came into being. On the other hand, in 2014, there was already a conflict in Ukraine, and I knew about at least a little bit about that. It's in the background of my mind. I'd read the newspapers occasionally, seen something on CNN. The augmented reality idea had been around for a while. Pokemon Go.
Yeah.
And I was wrestling with how we could and I've been afraid about nuclear war. I've been afraid of that since I was 12. So, these things, I didn't exactly bring them into being. They were already kind of there, but I could, as a novelist, I could think about them and bring them all together in a way that now I could make the claim that I was a prophet. Only I hope that I'm not, because the novel doesn't really have it's sort of dystopian. It's sort of an ambiguously dystopian novel. So I wouldn't want to live there, no matter how many times I got to play live action augmented reality Frogger. So my thought about I want to say something. I'm going to talk like I have my own. It's not a panel anymore. I'm talking. I think that I have a critique of Slavoj Žižek. I love Slavoj Žižek. I've talked to him a number of times. He was a big influence on Zer0 Books. But when I was starting that up, he helped inform that. Before that, when I was just doing Diet Soap, I stumbled upon the Parallax View. I was looking for the movie with Warren Beatty and the novel that it was based on, and I found Žižek instead. So it was a straight coincidence, and I read Žižek and then found him on YouTube and what have you, and eventually ended up interviewing him a few times. But I have a critique of him, which is that he doesn't embrace the labor theory of value, or what I think of as a central component of understanding capitalism and understanding Marx's critique of capitalism, but which isn't original to Marx. It comes from Adam Smith, and what Marx contributes is, I think, an understanding of how the labor theory of value was self-contradictory in a way that Smith didn't quite see, because he was from an earlier epoch. So when you talk about time energy, as an abstraction, what I would say is, yeah, it's labor time, and how that is been historically developed and industrialized. That is the primary thing that we should be wrestling with as the left, rather than
Now hold on. No, I'll let you go. Yeah,
so like,
it's based
like,
in Marx.
yeah, I'm sure it is, but I'm just saying. So like when we think about how things come into existence historically, like one thing we might think about is the assembly line. And yeah, Ford dreamed it up, and he brought people together to create this assembly line. But it also happened to be the case that before he did that, there have been huge political revolutions and major changes in both the modes of production and in politics in Europe. And so the conditions were right for someone to come along and make labor time more efficient and create massive profits this way. If he had been around 200 years earlier, there would have been no real market or function for an assembly line. It wouldn't have been possible for a number of reasons. So through political transformation and industrial or technological transformation, which ultimately comes down to social production, the way we work together to produce and reproduce our lives, these changes emerged. But it wasn't because of we simply thought them into existence in the right way. And it wasn't that we didn't think them in, or that we thought them in the reason some other form of production didn't emerge wasn't because it was hypostitional. Or is that right? Did I get it right? Hyper produces or hypo, whatever.
Hyper makes it happen. Hypo doesn't.
Right.
Yeah.
So, but I do think that a lot of materialist accounts of the world are deficient because they act as though the world is simply a natural phenomenon of empirical data, made up of empirical data. And so that what matters most is like how atoms interact or what the weather is like, and the ways in which we cooperate socially, and particularly the way our politics function to change our relationships has a dramatic material impact on the world. And most especially, there was the bourgeois revolutions and the industrial revolutions 200 years ago, and those have had a major transformative impact on the world, and we're still living with the consequences of them. And so that's where I think we should start, is with the history of revolutionary struggles for freedom and the way those have gone wrong, rather than some abstractions around just thought or just material reality out there beyond us. So that's what I have to say.
Mikey, by the way, you are part of this panel, so I don't know if you're still here or not, but you can also feel free to interject whenever you want to. I want to give Nance a chance to talk on that. I'll talk about time energy in a little bit, but we got to focus on Hypostition. I know now I'm gonna give you a copy, and then you have to. And then we'll talk about it once you have. Well, I'll just say my piece about that first while Nance gets set up. No, I've got this, Mike. And so basically, just that it came out of conversations with people, usually coworkers, long after I had read Marx. And so it was trying to make this conversation about surplus value and labor power relatable and intuitive. But then it also developed beyond that. And so the term time energy is supposed to, in unpacking it, set you up to be able to explain a lot of these things in commonsensical English. Because when you don't have energy, but you have time, that's garbage time. When you have energy, but not repeatable, reliable blocks of time, then that's something you can't really harness towards purposeful projects, right? And so this is getting at an aspect of things that.
But someone's putting them towards purposeful projects.
That's right. That's because time energy has been converted or reduced into labor power as a commodity on the market. Right. And so that's the other step. And so my actual master's thesis was called Time Energy and Existential Analysis of Labor Power. And so it's like, I see time energy as a precondition for labor power, also for, and this is where Marx would disagree, or maybe I'm not disagreeing with Marx, but I'm saying it's important to make this distinction between labor power and, say, creative or cooperative or intellectual power, like projects towards things that aren't labor per se. But for him, he's thinking in materialist, in this sort of materialist way where it's labor all the way down, right?
Listen, okay, so the first thing I'd say is labor power you should understand as a social contract. So the actual useful, sensuous labor that you do on the job is not what Marx means when he talks about labor power. He talks about
it's your potential to.
It's your potential to work, and the fact that you've contracted to work that is what you're selling.
Right.
The labor power. Why is that important to realize? Is because labor has been liberated when it can sell its labor power in a market, rather than have to be connected to a particular land or ancestral heritage,
title, or
right. So labor power makes you free, and it also means you're not committed to doing only one kind of work. You now have a lot more options available to you than you did before, theoretically, right? So the whole idea, like property rights in capitalist society, starts with that bodily autonomy to sell your labor power to whoever wants to buy it or rent it. And so
but it would still be labor power without a contract. You, as a slave, you still have labor power. It's just being expropriated as opposed to exploited.
I don't think it would be labor power in the way Marx means, because labor power as free labor is what gives commodities in society their value. And if you just buy slaves or computer equipment or robots and have them set to work to produce useful goods, there's no social value that's produced by that. So the concept of free labor and freedom is built into commodification. And that's a social form. That is a way it's a political social form of freedom that we have now. So the struggle for socialism is to create a new social form for freedom that can actually realize all the goals of bourgeois society. Like, you have the right to express yourself. You don't have to do drudgery. You're going to be able to benefit from what you produce. But the thing to understand about labor power and time is that none of that is neutral. It's not just any kind of physical work that could be done anywhere, but it is actually an abstraction, because now you can do any kind of work, but it's a social abstraction. It's historically produced. So, so you don't always have the ability to do any kind of work and make yourself into an abstraction, but that historically emerged.
And it also gets qualified through education.
Right now. So that's the other thing. It's like the intellectual side of this, like the intellectual work. It isn't production of commodities. It is generally financialized, or is purchased by some other aspect of the surplus. But it counts as, it counts as, this is this is an economic category I'm always a little unclear on, but I think it basically counts as constant capital. So it will not, in and of itself, produce profits.
Intellectual labor counts as constant capital?
Yeah, you're investing in constant capital. You're buying some value. Now, you might have a monopoly on that intellectual property, so you're charging rents and cutting out some of the surplus from the overall economy, but you're not. So there's nothing terribly wrong about being an intellectual worker. It's also not terribly more liberating theoretically than being part like a worker just building cars, because you're going to be directed towards what can be profitable in this form, social political form, rather than whatever you dream up. You're not necessarily going to be able to immediately realize through your intellectual labor alone, let's say a serum for immortality, unless there's already a market and things available that you need for that, and you can get either state or corporate backing to draw the labor together to produce that stuff. So anyway, so like we should always remember that the spaces we're working in and the ideas we're coming up with, and especially like something like time energy, is never neutral. It's always historically developed, and it's historically developed by free today, theoretically or formally free subjects.
Right.
Okay, and then I have something else I wanted to say, but I'm going to let someone else talk.
Yeah, so I guess just on that, I think like would manpower be a good substitution for this like pre-labor form type of labor?
Yeah, there's always
Like there's throughout time, labor, and social domination, Moish Pistone, Catron's old mentor, traces the contradiction throughout Marx's writing between when he uses labor and or labor power, because they're not the same, but he does use them both in a way where sometimes he's talking about the historically specific form, and other times he's trans-historicizing. And so Moish Pistone thinks that's an issue for the way that Marxists have inherited the project, because they often think of labor power and labor in this trans-historical way, which you're against, and Pistone's against it, and I'm against it, absolutely. But also there is this sense that all societies have depended on someone doing the work.
Yeah.
And that's what I was trying to get at. So,
right.
But in this, it's the specificity of the concept to capitalism that Pistone's trying to get Marxists to pay attention to, because the point is it's the form of labor itself that needs to change, and changing who owns the means of production, or who controls the means of production, or who regulates the law of value, or mitigates the contradictions of capitalism, whether that's, say, a worker state or not, doesn't change the actual form of labor itself, which is this sort of industrialized drudgery, which is what we're trying to get rid of. And he's trying to remind Marxists of that.
Right.
In time of social dominance.
Like a revolutionary working class struggle that sees the state dictatorship of the proletariat would task itself with overcoming the very form of labor that we're living under today. That's the idea. If you look at the Soviet Union, it didn't work out that well, but then there was a whole failure in Germany, and I'm not a great historian,
but we're up for that.
But we're for
changing the form.
Yeah, changing the form, giving the working class the power to eliminate their own subjectivity or their own form of freedom, to create a new form of freedom is the task of socialism. And the other thing I want to say is that that's why right now I tend to be very focused on the ways in which dissident politics of all types are being attenuated in the world, rather than focused on questions that might have 10 years ago plagued me about, like, what is the production of space under capitalism, or how does capitalism, what's the difference between neoliberalism and Fordism? These are important things to understand.
Right.
Or what does Heidegger mean? I mean, the one thing I want to say to you, that your talk about how the academy is no longer academic, and what was the other thing that you said? The academy is not really academic, and what was not really
activists are not
right. Yeah, right. So like the politics isn't political, and the academy, the so-called academic side, isn't really academic. Yeah, I think that's really important to realize. And the other thing is, like, critical theory is no longer critical theory. When you go to the Harvard's critical theory syllabus,
right,
you'll find a book that will bring a mishmash of different ideas, as if any attempt to be philosophical about the world is critical theory, like Heidegger's critical theory, Hannah Arendt is critical theory. All
Kimberly
these
Crenshaw is critical theory.
Kimberly Crenshaw's critical theory. And there are those. Critical theory means trying to understand the conditions of the possibility for the society you're in order to change them.
Right.
It is a code developed by the Frankfurt School for Marxism. That's critical theory. Philosophy, bourgeois philosophy is bourgeois philosophy. Kimberly Crenshaw's bourgeois philosophy. Heidegger's bourgeois philosophy. Marshall McLuhan is bourgeois philosophy. In interest, or sociology, and he's interesting. He's definitely worth reading. But then there's Marxism, which has these assumptions that I kind of tried to spell out in them. And I happen to believe that those explanations and understandings of the way the world works are true. So I think distinguishing between what critical theory used to mean and what critical theory is made to mean today, it's important. Anyway, so now
we call those lowercase critical theories, right?
Yeah.
I don't have anything to say at this moment, I guess, unless Dave or Nancy, you want to respond to anything, I guess we could open it up to, or Mike.
Nance, you didn't get to finish what he was saying. On hypostition, man, come on.
No, I kind of feel like we're, like, for the most part, the average person is just trapped in the mode of hypostition. I think until we understand what's actually available to us in terms of expression, in terms of action, in terms of self-actualization, like it's impossible to do anything anymore. And that sounds stupid and silly, but like we take for granted that there's a public to whom we can speak, and we get on these platforms and express ourselves and have our voices be heard. And we might go out and do some action that we feel is effective. But it's not, because we're always caught in this like self-exploitation. Everything is a project where we're not actually living our lives to live them for ourselves. We're living our lives to produce data for platforms and government organizations and all these things that are like harvesting all this data from us every second of every day. So like until we really come to terms with current material conditions, not 100 years ago, not political platforms and not tendencies and not ideals. Like, we all have ideals. We all have our magic space triangles that guide us. But it feels like we're living in this kind of fantasy world that's removed from the real world. And that is what keeps us from actualizing our beliefs. And I think like that's what I've been trying to articulate with hypostition. Mm-hmm. And it's due to the mode of production, like just the way everything is working. We're estranged from our own lives. Like, are the only emotional moments, like picture didn't happen.
I think one of the words you didn't use throughout your talk that I think needs to be added into the final version probably is the word prefigure, because prefiguring the politics you want as an anarchist idea has some wisdom to it perhaps, but the way that we see it, the way we tend to see it play out is not actually laying the conditions for achieving the society that's trying to be prefigured, right? And I'll use myself as an example as like a neo-Marxist radical feminist type of, left fusionist, like say 6 years ago, that the way that I was doing it with my gender performativity and all of these things, I started to wonder if it was actually creating the very thing that I'm against, which is these overly simplistic ideas about gender and the strictures that get put on us, and specifically hypermasculine, or like we could say toxic, whatever, reactions to say feminism, or say guys who perform differently, right? And I was realizing, like, I thought I was culture jamming so as to renormalize, to kind of stretch the Overton window or whatever. But then I realized, no, I'm just pandering to a specific audience. And what I'm playing within is not something that I have any control over. So it's not in any way helping me actually achieve that society that I wanted to. And it's also making it so I can't be heard by the kinds of people that I actually want to be heard by. Right. And so I don't know. I just thought I would apply it as self-critique to myself in this moment. But Mikey, I wanted to make sure you get to say something before we turn around and ask all of you all for questions. That's the live side. That's on the alien. Can I do that too? Yeah. Yeah. Mikey and then Doug, and then we'll do questions, and then we'll.
So I guess I guess where I'm at with it, when it comes to hyperstition or hypostition, either one in this case, there's a certain trafficking or intertwining of the virtual and the actual, or the material and the ideal. I mean, when I think of material production, I can't separate it from a certain relation to ideality. And I mean, Marx taught me this. So just a great quote here on this is from Capital, Volume 1, page 284. He says, "A spider conducts operations which resemble those of the weaver, and a bee would put a human architect to shame by the construction of its honeycomb cells. But what distinguishes the worst architect from the best of bees is that the architect builds the cell in his mind before he constructs it in wax. At the end of every labor process, a result emerges which had already been conceived by the worker at the beginning, hence already existed ideally. Man not only effects a change of form in the materials of nature, he also realizes his own purpose in those materials." And this cybernetic feedback loop thing, I think, helps understand this. And so when it comes to like a fiction versus actuality, or a virtual potential versus becoming real, there is a certain feedback loop, or even in Lacanian terms, a Mobius strip here that can be at work. Now, obviously, there's certain superstitions that never become real, right? There's all kinds of fictitious beliefs we have that never gain traction, never have a pathway to actualization. But whenever something does become actualized, it was either virtual beforehand or imagined beforehand. And so I see this trafficking between the two, this exchange between the two. And so, I mean, this is what Lain is getting at when he talks about templexity. So a templex is basically a temporal entwining of the past, right, / present and the future. And so this is where I think of it in terms of when we do our basic linear succession model of time, we view the past, the present, and the future as almost substantial moments that are what they are outside of their relations to one another. Now you can quickly kick it into another viewpoint and see, well, they're relational. The past is only the past in relation to the present, and blah, blah, blah. Okay. But what Lain is trying to do, and even Zizek with the concept of retroactivity in a way, they're trying to get these moments of time anomaly. And in these moments of time anomaly, when a time anomaly might not just be punctual, it can be spread out across time. What we have is this extant relationship between past, present, and future, where in a sense they're blurred together in the very process of going from actual or going from virtual to actual. And so I guess what I'm saying is there's a way to view time or certain temporal occurrences on a Mobius strip. And that breaks with this linear Kantian model of time. And but at the same time, I think it helps us understand many actualization processes, many processes through which certain states of affairs come into existence. Okay, leave it at that.
All right. So that quote from Marx is one of my favorites as well, but I don't think it means that that what makes men different from the bees is that they think it and then it becomes real, right? What makes men different from bees is that they're self-reflective. So they do conceive of what they want in their mind, and then they try and work together to create the world consciously. They have consciousness. That's true. But Marx also critiqued the young Hegelians who overemphasized the ideological side of their critique, claiming that something like these are people who seem to claim that if we stopped believing in gravity, no one would drown, and that there's no material basis for ideological beliefs. So what Marx and Engels pointed out was that before you can have any kind of ideology, you first have to have a means of self-subsistence. You have to have a way to produce the food stuff you need, some shelter. You already have to have a social form of life before a belief or plan or a subject can really emerge. So, and what I would say is today we have a form of life that mediates our productive activities for us and seems like it's outside of us. And that's where I want to turn to you is say, look, in this notion of alienation, the feeling like you're working, but you don't get to realize your own ambitions. Well, yeah, I mean, you're working class guy, right? And or even if you're not, you're in caught up in a system which is now taken to be a second kind of nature that we can't really address. It defines the limits of real politics for us. Everything has to operate within it. Everything has to operate within the reproduction of a working class that can produce the world as and make a profit and a surplus in a particular way. And huge amounts of effort are expended to maintain that. Wars are fought, holocausts have occurred. Huge amounts of speculative investment and bets on the future and financialization, all of that goes on in order to maintain that basic relationship. And in the 60s, Guy Debord, who was a big influence on Sadie Plant and the CCRU, along with the other post-Marxists, Guy Debord described the world that we're in after World War II as a spectacle, something that bedazzles us and keeps us passive, and most of all, disconnects us from history, both understanding the past and understanding that we are capable of shaping its development in its future. So it's a way of turning us all into passive spectators of a world beyond us, maybe on a screen or movie screen in Debord's imagination. And as if everything has already happened, as if we're just walking through the museum of our life, noticing what we've already done or who we already are. And so why do we feel that way? We feel that way because we have been politically suppressed, Debord thought. In 1988, he wrote Comments on the Society of the Spectacle, where he realized, his 1967 book, The Society of Spectacle, was maybe too optimistic. Things were, no, he killed himself in 19. Oh, you think he was murdered?
He got Epstein.
Well,
that's what Nance thinks.
One of his friends was murdered anyway, around in 1984, I think. So he wrote Comments on the Society of the Spectacle. And in that book, and this is where I'm going to get in my little hobby horse, he wrote about the war on disinformation that was happening in France around that time, and saying that one of the things that the spectacle that wants to keep us all passive does is turn all criticisms of itself into this category called disinformation. So we're now living in a time when the spectacle is really like overtly exerting itself every day. And also constantly announcing how fragile it is, bringing us right up to, it said, like Biden says, we're closer to nuclear war than we have been since the Cuban Missile Crisis. And also politics and dissent is less, cannot be tolerated now. If you want to say that something that isn't already validated by the Department of Homeland Security and that gets past the Department of Homeland Security fact checkers, if you don't want to go through that editorial process, you're not allowed to speak, not in any way that can be algorithmically promoted. I mean, it's not quite that bad yet, but it's getting to be that bad. So anyway, that's what I think the alienation is about, is the suppression of a working class politics and of socialism ultimately.
We're reading Matt Taibbi's Hate Inc. right now. And he's a great example.
We love Taibbi, and we appreciate the work you've done defending
Yeah.
his important discoveries this year.
I think, I mean, I point to Debord in my piece in the volume. the spectacle that's like layers upon layers upon layers, like it's like an onion now, because even when you think you're getting outside of it, you're not getting outside of it. You're just like playing the opposing role. You're playing Team Red and Team Blue and all that stuff. I think I can't help but think something fundamental has changed, however, and it has to do with the mode of production. I think, yes, of course, working class people are being repressed. Working class awareness and politics are being suppressed. But I think even if we had like a radical movement, it would still nothing would change, because we are so disempowered as workers. We're so atomized. We've been turned into discrete machines.
Like we could all show up and throw stuff, but like,
What do you compare and say? I'm sitting here thinking, there's guys out there, people out there watching that. How many times am I going to not let the woman be on the top? So what do you do? 11. Yeah.
No. I don't know what I think in all of this. And I'm okay with not knowing what I think quite yet, in terms of like, what does Marx mean, and what, like, all these various nuances that we're talking about here. It partly because I am relatively new to theory and reading compared to the three of you. Partly because I like want to take my time in understanding and forming that opinion on what to do. But I'm just kind of in the phase right now where like I'm disenfranchised with it all. I'm figuring it out. I've kind of reached my peak, like fuck everything, narcissism, the world's never gonna change. And I'm emerging out of it as like hopefully more a well-read individual. And so that is my answer. Like it's not a cop-out, but it's just like I don't know what I think yet, because I'm developing theoretically still.
well, this is one of your main complaints on tour about your education, is that you didn't have any primary works assigned the entire time.
Sociology department, we never read sociology. Like the way you say critical theory is not critical theory anymore. My sociology department was seemingly like not based in actual sociological texts, Marx, Weber, Durkheim. We got like little snippets in a textbook in a single class, and the rest was, let's read these news articles, let's read novels, let's read this indigenous fiction. It's like great, cool, it's all valuable, but not in 300 level sociology courses where we're supposed
This is an undergraduate level?
Yes, undergraduate level, but still 300, 400 level courses.
Yeah.
I was not just engaging with sociology.
Well, and-
general education.
Well, and then well, no, and to go on, you're the masters you're putting together right now. They keep removing all the theory related and the philosophy related stuff.
Really?
All this bourgeois thinking,
Yeah.
as well as the radical side. It's just not available anymore.
What kind of things are you doing?
So I will be going to Boise State for a master's degree interdisciplinary program in education, philosophy, and sociology. Philosophy department doesn't actually have a graduate program, period. And so I was going to supplement it with some kind of philosophy and theory related courses in the English department, in the communication department, with political science. It's like every time I find a class, oh, this one's great. Oh, it's not offered anymore. Oh, this one. Oh, it's not going to be offered that year because there's no interest. It's all this kind of instrumentalized courses that are focused in careerism and, you know, the administrative side, like of education. There's like a single philosophy of education course. The courses that are more theoretical or comparative in the education field even, oh, that's not going to be offered anymore starting next year, like the year I'm going to come in. And so I'm going to raise a stink. It's going to be part of my thesis. This degradation of the university and of education that I think is lacking in kind of all these conversations that we're having is like any sort of theoretical basis. Let's just act, let's just climb the corporate ladder. And so that's why I'm hesitant to like have any sort of, here's what I think. It's like, I don't know yet, because I didn't get the chance to engage with it in the university, the place where you're theoretically supposed to.
Well, at this point, I think we probably should do some concluding remarks, but we also didn't take any questions from the room. And so what I was thinking is let's take a couple questions and then we'll each in our closing remarks try to address.
Be like democratic.
Yeah. Well, Slavoj gave us full rights to do, what did he say? Anne?
Stalinist rights to cut me off.
Yeah. We've been running with those Stalinist rights the rest of tour ever since he said that.
The real Stalinist approach is cut them all off.
Yeah.
You don't get to talk.
Yeah.
So let's take our questions and comments from the audience. This microphone won't project, it's just for the speakers.
Yeah, but they can still speak. In.
Make sure to speak into it. Yeah. And then we'll take multiple questions and then each of us can address them in our own ways in our closing remarks.
So I'm about to have to leave because I've got to take my ride back to Olympia. So I have a drive back ahead of me. So I'm going to just take the answer offline. I'll watch it YouTube on my way home.
Cool.
So one thing I wanted to say is that after that Catherine Liu presentation, I made a comment in the YouTube about that, and I really appreciated, like, I'm an anarchist. My politics do not match Catherine Liu's, but I was very impressed by the fact that she had translated this text, and I think that that was very much missed by a lot of the trying to emphasize the philosophy of these words. And one thing that happens is, and it actually relates back to something Mikey was saying around like Slavoj just using the word belief instead of coming up with some jargon. So one thing I want to propose, and I've been trying to figure out how to exactly like make this into a question. I couldn't figure it out, but if it's around like, is the thing that's happening with, we're saying the jouissance of analytic philosophy has to do with wanting there to be a definition of that in this way that, like, I understand the like the theory side of this. I'm not a Lacanian or something. I can't speak to these texts specifically or these seminars or something, but I have been studying French for over 25 years, and jouissance is the most complicated word you could possibly translate. So when Lacan is using that word, he knows he's using something even more vague and common than belief, which means like maybe the jouissance in this continental philosophy has more to do with using really common words to try to add more technical current meaning to them. And I think that a lot of the resolution that comes from having this, like, we have to separate pleasure and enjoyment, is an English solution to a problem that wasn't started in English. And I think really overlooks that, like, translating is not translating words, it's translating a whole text. And in context, it might mean you're playing with only those two translations, but that you actually maybe can't, you can't translate every time jouissance comes up as being enjoyment. That sometimes in context, it might need to be the other point that's like the opposite side of this same argument.
Complex.
What would the other word be instead of enjoyment?
Well, I think that what tends to be proposed is enjoyment and pleasure. But like, yeah, if you look up jouissance, the two most, I mean, the synonym in French is plaisir. So like, it's not, it's not some new term. It's something very old, and it's something very.
Is it eroticized?
Very eroticized. So eroticized. That's why I made the comment that I liked her translation, because she said jouir is to come. And so like, what I almost want to propose is like, and again, I'm
French with a commonly used word for orgasm that like people use it all the time.
So what I want to say is maybe like if plaisir is kind of like getting into, and jouissance is maybe getting off on. So then jouir would just be like to get you some. It would be like a very generic point about that, right? So you could say to someone who wants to just go hustle harder that, like, yeah, go get you some, or you're getting yourself some when you do that. But that, like, yeah, that's not necessarily the same as getting into working or getting off on working. And so yeah, I just want to add that like I have a really hard time understanding how any of the Lacanian discussion that comes up in English relates back to French theory and this, like, I don't mean French theory in some trademark sense, but I can't relate it back to French a lot. And I would exactly point out, I've mentioned this to y'all before, that Slavoy's interviews in French, especially when he's on a panel with Alain Badiou, are very different. They're not near as perverse. And some of that is because some of the perverted language is more mundane and normal. A teacher in French will definitely just say merde in class and say shit. Like, that's not a bad word. It's not the same as in English, but that like maybe the perverseness hits us really good because we have kind of puritanical ears for it. And so there's a kind of audience for like being crass in English, but that maybe it doesn't even land in another language. And so like, yeah, I think
French is already so degenerate that it just
there's some things and yeah, like I don't know, that word comes up a lot. I've spent so much time trying to understand what that means, way outside of this and way more older texts in French, and it's just a very common thing that's super complicated. So yeah, like I said, I gotta go, so I'm not trying to run out on y'all.
Well, there wasn't a question, so you don't have to watch.
Right.
and we'll see you tomorrow,
Yes,
right?
I'll see y'all tomorrow.
Sweet.
Dave, can I say
Thank you.
something or?
Mike and leave.
Mikey, you can kind of address it in your closing remarks. We're gonna let a couple people say their things. Really
Yeah,
quick.
my question is really maybe too broad or simplistic, possibly basic, which means it's a possible detour into rabbit hole potential. So I actually want everybody to go before me. And if we don't get to me, that's absolutely fine. I can talk about it
No, just do it.
somewhere else.
Just do it.
Hundreds of people
Just do it.
waiting.
Okay, so this is more about Mikey's presentation. I really like how he described hyperstition. I feel like I understand it like a lot better than I used to. Things being sort of banished to the realm of fantasy and working in the background to become real. And when I think of the background and forefront, like politically right now, like especially as a person living in Portland, like leftism is definitely a more accepted attitude and at the forefront, professionally, especially here. So my question is, can you point to like a specific faction or like mode of ideology, and perhaps it's like in the right, that is manifesting itself in this like incubation of fantasy right now?
And then go ahead and yes.
So I'm not sure, but it seems like the first quarter of that discussion was just, I don't know. Am I wrong that we were just kind of dancing around the question of, do we reform labor to make time energy, or do we need time energy to reform labor? Is that kind of just where we were stuck at? I don't know. But if we were, then, are we just arguing over a sort of catch-22 that is always going to be a component of change by necessity, right? I mean, what we envision is always working with resources that are at the margins of the present circumstances that prompt the need for change, right? Now, we did eventually get to hypostition, and so I'm wondering if we were coming around to, is what we're worried about that hypostition is manifesting itself in a way that sucks useful time energy away from productive steps to change?
Good question.
I always like to talk. Can I answer?
Well, we got one more. Really, we got as many as all of you. If you're still here, yeah. As Andrew McLuhan told us when we were at the McLuhan Institute, one of the wonderful things about an interview is that you don't have to answer the questions. So in our closing remarks, we can choose which ones we respond to, which is thank you for giving us choices.
I'd like to start off by saying that I'm pretty bummed that I missed the CCRU discussion.
Yeah.
To tell.
Kabbalah.
But my question, I'm sorry, what's your name again on the right? Nance. Listening to your descriptions of hypostition, I could not help but think of ontology, specifically the Fisherian approaches to ontology. And I'm just curious about whether or not that played a role in your kind of development of this concept, and if so, how?
And then we got one last.
First, I'd like to commend your project. Trying to take the university, out of the academy. It's important. The academy's really been destructive to them. And I don't think that we should think that it isn't valuable or useful, or that it's not something socially necessary. But it has really been destructive to the left. And so I hope there's a lot of thought in like trying not to replicate some of those tendencies that exist there, which I think is harder than it's easy to say. It's harder to implement. It feels like theoretical work is so distant to the lives of working class people as a useful tool to navigate the circumstances they're in. And it gets so esoteric so quickly that without having the time and energy to avail yourself to it, it can seem meaningless. So I just hope leftist projects consistently and constantly ask themselves of how to bridge that gap, to lessen that gap. And it's like something that is talked about all the time in organizations and publicly, because like we don't have a lot of time left. As you point out, we could all die in a nuclear war. We're a similar age. I'm sure we've been waiting on that since we were 9. So at any rate, I just always try to put that out there, that we definitely need to be thinking about how to make it relevant for working class people, to like make it part of a movement that answers questions of their lives, like currently lost. That's all I have to say. Thanks for your time, and I've appreciated all your work for a while.
So one of the questions was from Mikey, and you.
We'll do Mikey, Doug, Nance, and I'll close it out. Okay.
Okay, so I mean, as far as hyperstition in politics, I mean, the way I view it is that time energy itself is this hyperstitional entity that at least the 4 of us are really big on seeing actualized as much as we can. And part of it is trying to understand how can this gain traction with people. You see already, you know, the anti-work movement and all of that. There's a certain level where you can detect a lot of people are fed up with the structure of labor, the structure of the work week. They want reduced work days, reduced working hours, more pay, etc. And we're feeling that, but how does any kind of material politics come into play? And part of it is, at least as far as I can see, is that hyperstition plays a part in that. And part of it is, for us, we don't see any kind of material left in America that has any institutional power. That what goes by the name the left isn't going to enact any material structuralist change in our situation. And so if there's anything like a left that can do it, it's not a left that currently exists. And so this is what, you know, I keep talking about trafficking with the future, which is the way they talk about it. But part of it is trying to hack the future in a way, trying to place a vision, place a fiction out there that can gain traction and help change our situation. And so that's at least how I kind of see the situation currently in relation to hyperstition. The only thing Dave, the whole thing with jouissance or pleasure versus enjoyment, okay, English and French, but the point is, in beyond the pleasure principle, we got to go back to Freud, right? We got to take a third step back, which is Freud is very clear that there's this thing he discovered in beyond the pleasure principle that is not the pleasure principle. The pleasure principle throughout his whole work, pleasure was this main thing that the libidinal economy was seeking, which is the release of excitation, which is to say homeostasis, right? That's all these various libidinal dynamics is about reaching a state of homeostasis. And the reality principle is his way of thinking, okay, well, we can't just reach homeostasis whenever we want it. We got to mediate our situation. There's a proper time and place to shit or piss or fuck or whatever, right? You can't just find homeostasis whenever you want it. This delayed gratification, right? But what he found in Beyond the Pleasure Principle is that there's certain experiences he was dealing with in the clinic, what we would now call post-traumatic stress syndrome, or even this experience he saw his grandson having, where he was reenacting the absence of his mother. Point is, there's these experiences that don't make sense if all you're working with is the pleasure principle. Because what he saw is that these subjects are producing an excess of excitation in themselves that they don't really find pleasurable. They don't really enjoy it, but they can't resist this buildup. They can't, they're hooked on doing this thing, and it's undermining their pleasure. It's self-sabotaging their homeostasis. And that is what will come to be called jouissance, right? But Freud doesn't have this other term, so he'll talk about it as death drive or whatever. But the point is that when we're talking about enjoyment or pleasure, we're trying to talk about these two different forms or levels of excitation in the body that Freud was getting at in his work later on. So jouissance corresponds to death drive, to the buildup of excitation, this intense traumatic kind of excitation that undermines your well-being. And pleasure principle is the release of excitation, return to homeostasis, return to equilibrium, and that these are two different tensions within our libidinal economies. And so that's why Zizek and Todd and myself would say, no, we need these two terms.
Doug or Nance? We're gonna
go straight down the line. Mark Fisher, definitely. I mean, I think every millennial leftist or malcontent or whatever, I think Mark Fisher said things that really resonated, really stuck with us. So I think even if I wanted to get outside of that, I couldn't. And I think now, especially with Mikey, who's going to hopefully start, this hopefully won't be the last, but with this course on Nick Land, where we can engage with the CCRU stuff in a more serious way. I think it was, at least for me and from what I saw, it was always just very superficial. It was just, oh, I enjoy this death of the future. Because we all kind of felt like this is it. It is the end of history, but it's not a good thing. Like, we are in fact fucked. And I think, again, at least most millennials internalized that and just said, fuck it, we're fucked. I think there's a lot more there. I think we are fucked, but I don't think that we are necessarily fucked. I think there is still something that can be done. So yeah, there's that.
You can say fucked, but not doing.
Yeah, that's a good way to say it. Yeah, fucked, but not doomed. Yeah, I like that. And then as far as hypostition, or this self-defeating behavior, actualizing in political action and all that, I do think that is the case. And again, I do think that is all that is on offer. I think we have to do something else. We can't just pick up the package of the ready-made movement and put on the costume and go through the motions, bring about the utopia that we all want. I think it's all bullshit, and we have to figure out something else.
Thanks, Nance.
Amen. Amen.
My closing statements are just an address to the comment you made. What's your name? Ian. That Ian made here in our live audience. Because I think that's something, you know, I know like Theory Underground is Dave's baby, and I've kind of like come in as not only Dave's partner and spouse, but as a fellow traveler in my own right. And I think it's something we think about a lot. This idea of, you know, trying to bridge the world of theory to be accessible to, not only accessible to, but like understanding of, relatable to the working class. And I know that's something that like all of us here really care about. And so I appreciate that. It is a good reminder to not be like so stuck in the jargon, and to try not to become like the academy. And it's something that, you know, in my work, I want to understand the academy so that we can kind of do a positive critique and understand what to do. And so that's where Carl Jasper's The Idea of the University, which was the first course that Dave and I and our friend Brian co-taught at Theory Underground. His book, The Idea of the University, where, like I said earlier, he defines the university as a community of truth seekers, and he does a positive critique of this, and that he puts forward all the things that should be included in this ideal university. And I think it's something that we try to uphold. We try to create, you know, a safe space for academic freedom. And I don't just mean that in like the ways that those words get kind of taken over by both left and right identitarian movements, but we are trying to create a space for everyone to come in, for the Oliver Anthonys of the world who, yeah, maybe we don't agree with where that resentment, where that anger, where that frustration gets directed to, but we want to engage it and not go, oh, you're just a worker. We, with our college degrees, know what's best. Like that's not what the goal is. And so I think that's what we're all trying to do here. And I just appreciate everyone for being out here and for hearing us out. I think if there's one thing that I've like noticed throughout this tour is that, and just in general, like in this kind of weird dystopian moment that we're in, is that working class people are ready to start thinking for themselves and ready to start being engaged in serious ways. Like, I know we all talk about this a lot, but the reason Joe Rogan is, I don't know the reason, but Joe Rogan is one of the most popular podcasters. He's not just giving people little, 30-minute, easy to digest sound bites. He's engaging people with a lot of different perspectives and long conversations and work, and people are here for it. And so I think we can kind of see the trends of like just talking to people throughout this tour. There's so much disillusion with politics, with activism, with academia, and people are like wanting to engage in something new, to maybe actually try to make some changes that we've all been waiting to see our entire lives. And so just thank you all, and pass it on to you.
Okay, so now I wish I had taken up on what can you summarize your question again? Because I about hypo.
Yeah, well, I started with just asking whether or not we were kind of going around in circles talking about whether time energy is necessary for labor change, or we need labor change for the time energy.
Right. So you asked, do we need to reform labor so that we can have the time energy to create political change? Is that?
Yeah, or
the other way around, right?
Or is it the other way around? I mean,
that we need to create political change so we can reform labor, right? But I mean,
yeah, and I said, this is just a catch-22 that happens by necessity with any change, right? Because you're always working at the margins of the resources that change is needed to not be at the margins.
Look, I think that we get off on in presenting ourselves with these problems as if they're really big puzzles when they're not. And what I mean by that is like, it's not a catch-22. It just is going to be hard. So one of the things that's hard is realizing that the working class are ahead of almost all of the left, and especially theorists. They were more in touch with reality over the last 2 years than most of us were. The trucker convoy, for instance, was right to demand bodily autonomy for themselves around the vaccine. Most of the left, including myself at the time, thought they were way off conservative reactionaries. But in fact, the vaccines weren't really blocking transmission, and that was known at the time. And the enforcement of those vaccines came along with an expansion of the power of the state overall, and extended into the realm of debanking people for their political activity and trying to, in an extrajudicial way, punish everyday workers for their political activity. And it should have been clear to any left that the people to stand with were the truckers, whether they were petit bourgeois or not, at that moment, rather than with Justin Trudeau and the progressive bureaucratic state. There are a lot of ways in which regular working class people, sometimes Democrats, sometimes Republicans, are ahead of the left, and that's because the left has to a large extent thrown in its lot with the bureaucratic state. So we find these questions really difficult. Do we need to get the policies through the Democrats before we can have the time and energy to get beyond them? That's the question that you're really asking. And that's the thing I want to say about Mark Fisher. Mark Fisher is great. The limit of Mark Fisher's politics was Corbynism. Okay. He was a really nice guy. I knew the guy who published The Vampire Castle, C. Derek Varn, originally in the North Star. And it was a very controversial and brave thing for Fisher to publish. But his vision didn't go beyond the Labour Party in the UK and trying to turn it back into some sort of, post-war working class welfare state party against the Blairites. And that was his vision. And it was basically the same vision as the Sanders campaign that came later. And look, that's all failed. That has failed. And not only that, those people who were part of that have, to a large extent, thrown in their lot with Biden at a time when there's a proxy war in Ukraine and the Department of Homeland Security is becoming indistinguishable from the Democratic Party. So, we need to, as the left, face up to our failures first, and then we can start to ask questions like, how do we help working class people? Really, what we need to ask is, how do they help us? How can we get some fucking sense knocked into us? That's I'll leave it there.
How do we get some sense knocked into us? Like, fuck. Yeah, I think we're having sense knocked into us every day. Is it good? No, but thank you everybody for the questions, for these remarks. The question of, do we reform labor for time energy, or do we need time energy to make labor? I think it's kind of related to the Catrone's thing that he was saying, which is that, the solutions will not come from like a self-conscious PMC. It's going to come from workers organizing. And I think that the question is, when he says that, it's a point of emphasis. He's trying to remind his students and the people who are there, who are mostly, seeing themselves as like these sort of influencers. Hey, it's not all about you. As Doug was just saying, workers are usually ahead of the intellectuals. But it's probably going to require a little bit of everybody, right? It's going to require a little bit of everybody. And what kinds of everybody are we talking about, right? Like, if it's going to require a little bit of everybody from every class stratum, then which people, right? And right now, the assumption is it's going to be the ones with the most liberal, the most progressive values. And I think at least because I don't want to loop you in. I don't want to necessarily.
Yeah, you don't want to get.
I don't want to say Doug agrees, but I get called a red brown for my position, and I'm not one. But it's easy to confuse it from a certain standpoint. You might think that. The reason I'm not a red brown is because I don't like totalitarianism, left or right. But I do believe that normies and working class people across the spectrum are not just left or right. I think that there's a lot more ideological diversity than that, and that it's like, what, 12% of the population is involved in the primaries, and then about 25% of the population votes red or blue. That leaves about 50% of the population that feels disaffected. All right. And so I think that something Sanders and Trump both did was appeal to that, and they were able to get a little extra buy-in from people who just can't believe in either of these parties. But I don't think that that's the end point. That's like the beginning point, and it's the beginning point for an ongoing process. And part of that ongoing process, and I like that Catrone said this to us later in the restaurant, was that, socialist politics presupposes an already self-organizing working class that is already building its own institutions. I think that we're beginning to see that as well, but that got hollowed out, that got gutted, right? And it's been 100 years of that not existing. So we're out here saying workers need to go from being in itself to for itself. But when that language was being used, there was already a working class in itself that could see itself and then decide to be for itself. But right now, it doesn't even see itself. It sees red versus blue, or it sees this sports team versus that one, or maybe you're more into collecting this kind of thing on the internet or that kind of a thing, right? Hyper niche identities. And so universal politics, obviously, is, I think, something we're all interested in. And time energy is meant to be something that we universally lack, that we can all agree is the precondition, not just for labor power, but also the precondition for being able to raise your family and have relationships with your kids. It is the precondition for being able to learn and develop or master skills that are related to your actual talents or your calling, right? And so the question of organizing around time energy is really important to me, because without a concept for that thing we lack, if we're just pushing for a shorter workday and a higher pay, and we're not saying, no, we need large, reliable, repeatable throughout the week, energy-infused blocks of time. If we're not putting that forward, and it's just, we need a little bit more time in the week. No, we're not going to get it, because a little bit more time freed up, and Andre Gors goes into this, and I talk about this in the afterword of my book. That little bit of freed up time gets eaten. Yeah, this is for you, Doug. That freed up time goes right back into necessary labor, a preoccupation with necessary labor, except it's your chores, it's your errands. Andre Gors uses the example of a single mother who's working 2 jobs, and then her job starts paying her a bit more and cutting her hours a bit shorter so that she has a bit more time. But that's just more time doing errands. It's not these large energy-infused repeatable blocks of time. And if we can see that as valuable, as a necessary thing for living a dignified human life, and being able to create or cooperate with others outside of the dictates of capital and the profit motive, if we can't do that, then all free time will keep just being gobbled up by necessary labor. And so what we want is substantial freedom. And that substantial freedom is, in part, a freedom for time energy that you can do stuff with outside of the market, right? And that's I think probably I just say it in my book, I am a time energy reductionist, right? And so if your politics means that you think we need to center or choose or advocate for something that is so niche and polarizing that it's guaranteed to keep the overwhelming majority from being on your side, then it's suicidal hypostition. It's a hypostition in this sense that, we want equality for all, but or we want to, sure, I want to live in a classless society. I don't want borders. But if you put that front and center, then we're not going to get anywhere, right? Because it's too tall of an order. Like, we need plausible, not just possible, right? And radical imagination is not enough, because imagination without plausibility is just nothing. And so the last thing is, in terms of making theory relevant to workers, I think that Mikey's piece in here is probably one of my favorites for that. And it is called Wage Labor and Jouissance, Why the Left Needs Zizek. And it's because basically he was having these conversations with Marxist friends. Why do we need Zizek? Why do we need this concept? That concept just sounds like a pretentious thing to say. Why do we say it? But I want to just draw a distinction between having a conversation between ourselves, like, oh, we're theorists and we care about theory, or, oh, we are the people that this book is dedicated to. Workers with earbuds, right? We're workers with earbuds who got burnt out on listening to podcasts and decided, you know what? I don't want to just listen to smart people talk. I want to actually be one of them, but that requires time, energy to actually read books. So I can't find where it actually says it. Geez, it is in there. Whatever. It's to the workers with earbuds. And if we're having conversations with workers with earbuds who are trying to get into theory, it's going to be different than conversations that you have with the general public. That's the I just want to end on that is like different audiences, all spaces are different. The internet makes us think that all spaces are the same and they're not. So thank you for being in this space that's trying to do something different. I really appreciate it, everybody. Hope to see you at the pizza place afterwards. Thank you. Take care.
I'm just gonna go through all the people. Oh, I noticed you're taking a lot of my people.
That's why people are accusing us of just being you.
Sully and.
No, she belongs to Spiked. What are you talking about?
No, she belongs to the old Zer0 Books.
This is